The Vatican Secret Archives, a treasury of faith and history. Nestled beneath the heart of Rome, behind iron doors and stone walls that echo with centuries of silence, the Vatican Secret Archives, officially Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, stand as one of the world's most enigmatic repositories. Spanning 85 kilometers of shelving and housing over 35,000 cataloged entries, these archives preserve more than 12 centuries of documents, from papal letters to trial records, from sacred art to diplomatic correspondence. Far from a vault of conspiracies, the archives are the private collection of the Pope, safeguarding the triumphs, struggles, and reflections of the Catholic Church. Drawing on the perspective of a former caretaker, granted rare access, this article unveils the archive's contents, revealing a complex interplay of faith, politics, and humanity. Rather than hidden secrets, the archives hold truths too profound or sensitive for immediate revelation, preserved with care for future generations. A sanctuary of memory. The term secret in Archivum Secretum is a misnomer. In Latin, secretum means private, not clandestine. The archives belong solely to the Pope, distinct from the broader Church's records, underscoring their intimate connection to the papacy's spiritual and temporal authority. Access is tightly controlled, with only 60 to 80 scholars admitted annually, each vetted for specific research purposes. No photographs, photocopies, or unrestricted browsing are permitted, ensuring the document's sanctity and security. The archive's physical expanse is staggering 85 kilometers of shelves organized across chambers that range from dimly lit vaults to modern climate-controlled rooms. The collection spans the 8th century to the present, encompassing handwritten parchments, medieval codices, and typed reports. Each document, whether a pope's unsent letter or a bishop's plea, carries the weight of history, offering glimpses into moments when the Church navigated divine ideals and human frailties. The caretaker's perspective. The narrative of a former caretaker tasked with cleaning and delivering documents provides a unique lens into the archive's inner workings. On quiet nights, when oil lamps flickered and oversight waned, the caretaker explored restricted sections, driven by a desire to understand truths that dwell between light and darkness. Their account avoids sensationalism, portraying the archives not as a fortress of secrets, but as a sanctuary where the Church's humanity is laid bare. Every page, they suggest whispers of faith's resilience amid imperfection, preserved for those patient enough to listen. Historical treasures, of windows into the past. The archives are a gateway to pivotal moments in Western and global history, documenting the Church's role in shaping civilization. Galileo and the clash of science and faith. Among the most studied collections are records of Galileo Galilei's 1633 trial by the Inquisition. His 1613 letter defending heliocentrism, arguing it did not contradict Scripture, is preserved alongside the 1616 decree, declaring the theory heretical. These documents capture the Church's struggle to reconcile emerging science with doctrine, a tension resolved centuries later when Pope John Paul II acknowledged the Church's error in 1992. A marginal note from a 1616 cleric questioning Scripture's silence on centrifugal force hints at early doubts, preserved as a testament to intellectual honesty. The Knights Templars' hidden absolution. The 14th century trial of the Knights Templar, long believed to have ended in their destruction, is reframed by the Parchmentum Chenal discovered in 2001. This document reveals Pope Clement V secretly absolved the Templars, contradicting public narratives. Its concealment for 700 years raises questions about the Church's motives, perhaps to protect its authority during a turbulent era. The archives thus preserve not only facts, but the complexities of their suppression. World War II, silence, and secret acts. Declassified in 2020, records from Pope Pius XII's papacy, 1939 to 1958. address one of the 20th century's most debated questions. Did the Vatican do enough during the Holocaust? Letters from bishops, such as one from Lviv in 1942, pleaded for intervention as Jews were expelled. The Vatican's responses, often limited to calls for prayer, reflect a cautious strategy to avoid endangering Catholic communities under Nazi control. Yet files also document secret efforts. Convents like Santa Brigida hid hundreds of Jews, risking discovery. An undelivered 1942 speech draft, condemning millions of innocents destroyed, suggests intent stifled by fear of repercussions. These records reveal a fractured moral landscape where silence was both a shield and a wound. Faith's fractures, Reformation and Inquisition. The archives illuminate the Church's internal struggles during periods of division and judgment. The Reformation's lost dialogue. Secret exchanges between Martin Luther and Vatican envoys in the 1530s, including Bishop Girolamo Alejandro's theological concessions, show attempts to avert the Catholic-Protestant schism. Preserved in sealed dossiers, these records reveal pride and power, overwhelmed unity, with the Church opting for authority over compromise. The documents' restricted access underscores their sensitivity as they expose vulnerabilities in the Church's narrative of infallibility. The Inquisition's moral dilemmas. Thousands of Inquisition records spanning the 12th to 19th centuries detail heresy trials, including that of Giordano Bruno, executed in 1600 for advocating a boundless universe. A cleric's note, "If we burn him, history will never forgive us," captures the conflict between doctrine and conscience. These files, far from glorifying judgment, preserve the Church's introspection, acknowledging the cost of its rigidity. Global reach, colonialism, and diplomacy. The archives document the Church's global influence, often entwined with power and conflict. Colonialism's double-edged sword. The 1493 papal bull Inter Caetera, dividing the non-Christian world for Spain and Portugal, marks a moment when faith was politicized. Letters with monarchs prioritized missionary spread, often ignoring indigenous suffering. Yet voices like Father Bartolomé de las Casas, who in 1537 decried Caribbean atrocities, and Pope Paul III's Sublimis Deus, affirming indigenous humanity, show dissent. These records, preserved in folders labeled Decrees Concerning the New World, reveal the Church's complicity and its internal critiques. Diplomacy with distant empires. Correspondence with non-Christian powers highlights the Vatican's diplomatic finesse. A 1584 letter from Ottoman Sultan Murad III proposed a commercial pact met with cautious Vatican openness. 17th century exchanges with Japan's Tokugawa shogunate, preserved in wooden statues to evade bans, reflect failed but resilient missionary efforts. A 1713 meeting with Qing dynasty officials addressed the Chinese rights controversy, seeking cultural compromise. These files portray a Vatican striving for dialogue, patient in the face of rejection. Women's voices. Silent but enduring. A wooden box labeled Mulieres, in Silentio Ecclesiae, Women in the Silence of the Church, holds records of women's contributions, often marginalized but never erased. Hildegard's unanswered challenge. 12th century nun Hildegard von Bingen's letters to Pope Eugenius III, questioning why women's voices needed male intermediaries, were met with silence, but not condemnation. Her writings, praised yet distanced, reflect the Church's ambivalence toward female authority. Nuns' quiet resilience. From the 9th to 16th centuries, nuns' prayers and poems like "I ask to tend the flame unseen" were copied and passed in convents, preserving a spiritual legacy. These texts, soft as whispers, affirm women's role in sustaining faith. Modern debates. A 2016 meeting on female deacons documented in the archives included a redacted cardinal's note: "If a truth must be hidden because our structure cannot contain it, the fault is not in the truth." This ongoing discussion, rooted in evidence of early Christian deaconesses, underscores women's enduring presence, preserved as a challenge to future generations. Reserved crimes. Humanity's failings. The Delicta Reservata section records internal crimes handled under canon law and the 1929 Lateran Treaty. Theft and mercy. In 1969, a monk stole St. Lawrence's relics, claiming divine guidance. A closed trial led to his laicization, with a note citing misdirected faith as grounds for mercy. Murder in the Gardens. A 1982 murder of a Vatican citizen's son in the Vatican Gardens, detailed in a 400-page dossier. Castel, AG 882, implicated a mentally unstable gatekeeper. Confined internally, he avoided Italian courts prioritizing the peace of the faithful. Financial shadows. Suspected 2009-2011 money laundering through the Vatican Bank, noted for negligence in monitoring transfers, led to the director's quiet resignation. The archives note, "We carry the wound," reflects internal accountability. Emanuela Orlandi's mystery. The 1983 disappearance of 15-year-old Vatican citizen Emanuela Orlandi, marked Reservatissimo, includes a 1985 memo about a claim she was alive for political leverage. Silence was chosen to avoid chaos, leaving her case unresolved for 40 years. These records reveal the Vatican's preference for discretion, protecting its moral foundation while documenting its flaws. Art and science beyond the sacred. Hidden masterpieces. The Deposito Pittorico Riservato holds unseen artworks like Michelangelo's dark sketch deemed too human, and Caravaggio's unadorned St. Peter. These works preserved but withheld challenge theological certainty with raw humanity. Astronomical harmony. The Spicola Vaticana files, including 1610 notes by Jesuit astronomer Christopher Clavius, show the Church's engagement with the cosmos. A 1741 draft by Pope Benedict XIV to rehabilitate Galileo, though unpublished, reflects quiet redemption. 20th century eclipse expeditions and NASA correspondence affirm faith's dialogue with science. Rituals and prophecy. The mystical veil, sacred rituals. Manuscripts like Ordo Rituum. Conclavis detail papal conclave rituals with coded oaths, ensuring silence. A 1945 ritual for Rome's potential fall. Benedictio Ultima remains unperformed, symbolizing the Vatican's ceremonial depth. St. Malachi's prophecy. A 1595 copy of the St. Malachi prophecy listing 112 papal mottos is monitored but not endorsed. Its final prediction of Peter the Roman stirs debate, especially post-2013, but the Vatican dismisses it as retrospective, preserving it as a cultural artifact. Conclusion. Truth's patient keeper. The Vatican's secret archives are not a vault of conspiracies, but a treasury of truth's complexity. They preserve the Church's triumphs, its art, science, and diplomacy alongside its struggles, silence during crises, suppressed voices, and moral failings. The archive's meticulous care suggests a belief that truth, however bitter, is essential for redemption. As the caretaker notes, the archives are a chapel, not a fortress, inviting listeners to engage with faith's unvarnished reality. Inscribed on a chamber door, Veritas temporis est. Truth belongs to. Time captures their purpose to wait until humanity is ready to understand, forgive, and grow. The private realm of the papacy. The Vatican's secret archives, located in a fortified complex beneath Vatican City, are among the world's most exclusive historical collections. Spanning 85 kilometers of shelving and housing, over 35,000 cataloged entries, they encompass parchments, codices, and modern files from the 8th century to the present. Unlike public church records, these archives are the Pope's personal domain, a distinction that underscores their sacred and selective nature. Access is granted to a mere 60-80 scholars annually, each rigorously vetted, and no document may be photographed or reproduced without explicit approval. The archive's security, 3 iron doors, each requiring unique keys, symbolizes their intimacy with the papacy. Yet their purpose is not to conceal, but to protect preserving truths too sensitive or profound for immediate disclosure. As the former caretaker notes, the archives are less a fortress than a chapel where the Church's triumphs and frailties are held in quiet reverence, awaiting the moment when humanity is ready to receive them. A caretaker's silent journey. The caretaker's narrative offers a rare glimpse into the archive's shadowed corridors. Tasked with cleaning shelves and delivering manuscripts, they seized moments of solitude to explore forbidden sections, guided by a yearning for truths that dwell between light and darkness. Their reflections, free of sensationalism, portray the archives as a living testament to the Church's humanity, its devotion interwoven with its imperfections. Each document, from a pope's hesitant draft to a heretic's plea, carries the weight of unresolved questions preserved not to obscure, but to honor the complexity of faith. Chronicles of history, the Church's epics. The archives are a treasury of historical moments, capturing the Church's role in shaping the world. Galileo's truth and the Church's reckoning. Among the most poignant records are those of Galileo Galilei's 1633 trial. His 1613 letter defending heliocentrism as compatible with Scripture sits alongside the 1616 decree branding it heretical. These pages reveal a church grappling with the dawn of modern science, torn between doctrine and discovery. A 1616 cleric's marginal note questioning why Scripture omits his mention of planetary motion hints at internal descent. Centuries later, Pope John Paul II's 1992 apology acknowledged the Church's error. But the archives preserve the raw tension of that era, a reminder of faith's evolving dialogue with reason. The Templars' secret redemption. The 14th century dissolution of the Knights Templar, long shrouded in myth, is clarified by the Parchmentum Shenol, uncovered in 2001. This document reveals Pope Clement V's private absolution of the Templars, contradicting their public condemnation. Its 700-year concealment suggests a church protecting its authority amid political turmoil. The archives thus hold not only events, but the reasons for their silence, reflecting the delicate balance of power and truth. World War II. The weight of silence. Records from Pope Pius XII's papacy 1939 to 1958, opened in 2020, address the Church's response to the Holocaust. A 1942 letter from a Ukrainian bishop begged for action as Jews faced deportation, met with Vatican calls for prayer rather than public condemnation. Yet hidden acts of courage emerge. Convents across Italy sheltered Jews, documented in coded reports. An undelivered 1942 speech draft denouncing the extermination of entire peoples reveals intent stifled by fear of Nazi retaliation. These files capture a church navigating moral peril where silence was both a strategy and a scar. Faith's fault lines, schism and judgment. The archives document the Church's internal struggles where unity and authority were tested. The Reformation's missed bridge. In the 1530s, secret letters between Martin Luther and Vatican envoy Girolamo Alejandro reveal efforts to prevent the Catholic-Protestant split. Alejandro's theological concessions, preserved in locked dossiers, were overruled by a church prioritizing control over compromise. These records, restricted to avoid exposing vulnerabilities, show how pride widened Christianity's divide, a wound the archives quietly preserve. The Inquisition's heavy hand. Inquisition records spanning centuries include the 1600 trial of Giordano Bruno, burned for envisioning an infinite universe. A cleric's lament, "History will not absolve us for this," accompanies the verdict, revealing moral unease. These documents, far from celebrating judgment, reflect the Church's reckoning with its own severity, preserving both the act and its regret. The global Church power and compassion. The archives trace the Church's expansion marked by ambition and empathy. Colonialism's moral crossroads. The 1493 Bull Inter Caetera, dividing the Americas for Spain and Portugal, politicized faith as letters with monarchs urged missionary zeal. Yet Father Bartolomé de las Casas's 1537 plea to Pope Paul III decried indigenous suffering echoed by Sublimis Deus, which affirmed their humanity. These records stored in New World folders expose the Church's complicity in conquest alongside its dissenting voices. Diplomacy across cultures. The res diplomatici files detail exchanges with non-Christian powers. A 1584 letter from Ottoman Sultan Murad III proposed trade cautiously welcomed by the Vatican. 17th century missives hidden in Japanese statues show missionaries defying Tokugawa bans. A 17-13 Qing dynasty dialogue on Chinese rights sought cultural harmony. These records portray a Vatican patient in dialogue, preserving faith's global reach. Women's echoes faith's silent guardians. A box labeled Mulieres in Silentio Ecclesiae holds women's stories often overlooked but enduring. Hildegard's bold voice. Hildegard von Bingen's 12th century letters to Pope Eugenius III, questioning male-only preaching, were preserved despite their challenge. Her unanswered call reflects the Church's hesitation to amplify women's authority. Nuns Unseen legacy. From the 9th to 16th centuries, nuns' prayers like "I carry the light no man sees" were copied in convents, sustaining faith's flame. These texts, delicate yet defiant, affirm women's quiet strength. The Deaconess Debate, a 2016 file on female deacons, includes a redacted note. The fault lies not in the truth, but in our readiness. Evidence of early Christian deaconesses fuels ongoing discussions preserved as a question for the future. Shadows of sin, reserved crimes. The Delicta Reservata section records internal wrongs handled discreetly under canon law. A monk's misguided faith. In 1969, a monk stole St. Lawrence's relics, claiming divine visions. A secret trial led to his laicization with a note citing mercy for faith gone astray. Murder in sacred ground. A 1982 murder in the Vatican Gardens, Castel AG 82, implicated a disturbed gatekeeper. Confined internally, he avoided public trial, prioritizing the faithful's peace, as a 400-page dossier explains. Financial missteps. A 2009 to 2011 Vatican bank scandal involving unmonitored transfers ended with the director's quiet exit. The note, "We bear the wound in silence," reflects internal resolution. Emanuela Orlandi's unresolved fate. The 1983 disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi, marked reservatissimo, includes a 1985 claim she was held for leverage. Silence was chosen to avert chaos, leaving her case a lingering mystery. These files reveal a church shielding its sanctity while documenting its humanity. Art and wonder, hidden creations, unseen masterpieces. The Deposito Pittorico Riservato holds works like Michelangelo's somber sketch too raw for display, and Caravaggio's humble St. Peter. These pieces, withheld for theological reasons, capture faith's human face. Apparitions and miracles. The Supernaturalis Recensio evaluates phenomena like Fatima 1917, validated for devotion, and rejected hoaxes like a 1966 vision. The Vatican's scrutiny preserves mystery with discipline. The Cosmos and Prophecy Beyond Earth. Stargazing faith. The Spicola Vaticana files, including 1610 Jesuit notes, show the Church's astronomical curiosity. A 1741 draft to honor Galileo, though unsent, reflects reconciliation. NASA letters bless lunar missions, merging faith and exploration. Malachi's enigmatic prophecy. A 1595 St. Malachi manuscript predicting 112 popes is preserved, but not endorsed. Its final motto, Peter the Roman, stirs debate. Yet a 1978 memo calls it retrospective fancy, guarding against apocalyptic fears. Conclusion. Truth's quiet keeper. The Vatican's secret archives are not a labyrinth of conspiracies, but a mirror of the Church's soul. Behind iron doors, they preserve faith's triumphs, its art, diplomacy, and science, alongside its questions. Why was silence chosen? Why were voices ignored? The caretaker's journey reveals a church wrestling with its humanity, its pages whispering of redemption through truth. Inscribed in a chamber, veritas temporis est. Truth belongs to time, encapsulates their mission to hold truths until the world is ready to listen, understand, and heal. A fortress of history. The Vatican's secret archives, established in their modern form in 1612, are a marvel of preservation, safeguarding parchment scrolls, medieval codices, and typed reports from the 8th century onward. Housed behind fortified doors, the collection is meticulously organized with climate-controlled vaults protecting fragile manuscripts. The term secret derives from the Latin secretum, meaning private, reflecting the archive's status as the Pope's personal domain, distinct from the Church's broader records. This exclusivity limits access to a select few, ensuring that the documents, many too sensitive or complex for public consumption, remain under careful stewardship. The archive's contents span the sacred and the secular, from theological treatises to diplomatic exchanges. They capture moments when the Church stood at the crossroads of faith and power science, and doctrine, morality, and pragmatism. By preserving these records, the archives serve as a bridge to the past, revealing how decisions made in Rome rippled across continents and centuries. Galileo's Trial: Science versus Faith. The heliocentric challenge. Among the archive's most studied collections are records of Galileo Galilei's trial, 1613-1633, a defining clash between science and religion. Galileo's 1613 letter to the Vatican defending heliocentrism, the theory that Earth orbits the Sun, argued it aligned with Scripture when interpreted allegorically. Preserved in pristine condition, this letter reflects Galileo's bold attempt to reconcile discovery with faith. However, the Church's 1616 declaration, also archived labeled heliocentrism, formerly heretical, citing its contradiction of geocentric biblical interpretations. The Inquisition's verdict. The 1633 Inquisition records detail Galileo's trial, where he faced charges of heresy. Forced to recant under threat of torture, he was sentenced to house arrest, his works banned. The archives preserve his signed recantation alongside notes from inquisitors revealing their struggle to reconcile institutional authority with truth. A marginal comment from a 1616 cleric questioning Scripture's silence on planetary motion hints at internal doubts, underscoring the Church's difficulty in reconciling tradition with reason. A belated reconciliation. Centuries later, Pope acknowledged the Church's error, a gesture informed by these archival records. The documents remain a powerful reminder of the tension between faith and reason, preserved not to obscure the Church's misstep, but to honor the complexity of its journey toward understanding. The Knights Templar, a hidden absolution. The Templars' fall, the 14th century dissolution of the Church. A powerful military order is one of history's enduring mysteries, clarified by a remarkable archival find. In 1307, under pressure from secular authorities, Pope Clement V ordered the Templars' arrest on charges of heresy and corruption. The order was disbanded, its leaders exiled, and its legacy tainted. For centuries, the Church was believed their story, fueling tales of lost treasures and secret societies. The Parchmentum Channel. In 2009, the discovery of the Parchmentum in the archives upended this narrative. This 1908 document reveals a secret absolution, declaring their innocence after private investigations. Hidden for centuries, the parchment raises questions about why this absolution was suppressed. Archivists suggest Clement concealed it to protect the Church's authority during a volatile era. The document's secrecy, legacy of silence. The Parchmentum underscores the archive's role in preserving truths too sensitive for their time. Its revelation challenges historical narratives and invites reflection on the Church's pragmatic choices where political survival often outweighed justice. The Templar records remain a testament to how the archives guard history's nuances. World War II. Silence or silence. The Holocaust's moral dilemma. Records from Pope Pius IX's papacy, 1939-1958, address one of the most contentious debates: the Vatican's response to the Holocaust. As persecution escalated, bishops across Europe sent urgent pleas to Rome. A 1942 letter begged for action as Jews faced deportation, warning of unimaginable horrors. The Vatican's responses reflected a cautious stance, prioritizing the Church's neutrality to protect communities under occupation. Quiet acts of rescue. Yet the archives also revealed discreet efforts to protect Jewish people. Coded reports document instances where convents such as Rome's hid hundreds of Jewish families, often at great risk. Vatican diplomats issued secret documents to facilitate escapes actions, detailed in confidential memos. These efforts, though significant, were overshadowed by the public silence, which critics argue emboldened further atrocities. The unspoken speech. A 1942 document, never delivered, offers insight into intentions. Condemning the systematic destruction of innocent people, it was shelved, likely to avoid endangering parishes or provoking further retaliation. The archives preserved this draft, alongside notes debating its risks, revealing a leader torn between moral outrage and strategic restraint. These documents fuel ongoing debates about the legacy of the Church, with defenders citing his covert aid and critics decrying his failure to speak out. A contested legacy. The files illustrate the archive's power to reframe history. They neither absolve nor condemn, but present a complex portrait of a church navigating a moral minefield. By preserving both the pleas for action and the reasons for silence, the archives invite scholars to grapple with questions of responsibility, courage, and the cost of neutrality. Art and letters, the Church's cultural tapestry. Michelangelo's intimate correspondence. The archives extend beyond controversies to include cultural treasures that connect the Church to broader historical narratives. Michelangelo's letters, written during his work on the Sistine Chapel 1508–1512, reveal his frustrations with papal demands and his spiritual reflections. One letter, lamenting the weight of painting heaven while bound to earth, offers a glimpse into the artist's humanity, preserved as a testament to faith-inspired creativity. Bernini's sketches. John Lorenzo Bernini's sketches, tucked among architectural plans for St. Peter's Basilica, showcase his vision for Baroque splendor. A preliminary drawing of the baldacchino canopy, annotated with notes on divine symmetry, reflects the Church's role as a patron of art. These sketches, rarely seen, highlight the archive's preservation of beauty alongside doctrine. Mary Queen of Scots' farewell. A poignant artifact is the farewell note of Mary Queen of Scots, written before her execution. Addressed to a Vatican envoy, it expresses her steadfast Catholic faith amid persecution. The note, stained and fragile, embodies the personal cost of religious conflict, linking the Church to Europe's turbulent era. A cultural nexus. These artistic and literary treasures demonstrate the archive's role as a cultural nexus where faith intersects with human expression. By safeguarding such documents, the Vatican preserves the Church's legacy as a steward of civilization, even as it navigated political and spiritual storms. The archive's role: gateway to history. Strict access and preservation. The Vatican's secret archives' restricted access, limited to 60 to 80 scholars, annually ensures meticulous preservation, but also fuels curiosity. Scholars must submit detailed proposals, and access is granted only for specific documents, with no browsing permitted. This exclusivity reflects the archive's dual role, protecting sensitive truths while allowing controlled exploration of history. From crusades to science, the archives span a vast historical arc, from Crusade-era papal bulls to Enlightenment scientific debates. Records of the Fourth Crusade reveal the Church's role in diverting holy wars for political gain, while 18th century files on Jesuit astronomers show faith's engagement with the cosmos. These documents preserved with rigorous care position the archives as a gateway to understanding the Church's influence across epochs. Controversies as catalysts. The controversies housed in the archives: Galileo's trial, the Templars' absolution. The silence serve as catalysts for reflection. They challenge simplistic narratives of the Church as infallible or oppressive, revealing a human institution wrestling with its ideals. By preserving these records, the archives invite scholars to explore history's gray areas, where faith power and morality collide. Conclusion: preserving truth's complexity. The Vatican's secret archives are more than a repository of documents. They are a living chronicle of the Catholic Church's journey through history. From Galileo's defiant letters to the Templars' secret redemption from wartime dilemmas, to Michelangelo's introspective notes, the archives capture moments that shaped the world. Their treasures and controversies, preserved behind iron doors, reflect the Church's triumphs and trials, its humanity laid bare. With access granted to only a few, the archives remain a selective window into the past, guarding truths that challenge, inspire, and endure. As a Latin inscription in the archives declares veritas temporis est. Truth belongs to time. These records await those ready to listen, offering a profound glimpse into the heart of history. The archives, a sanctuary of truth. The Vatican's secret archives, formally established in 1612, are the Pope's private repository distinct from the Church's public records. The term secretum, Latin for private, underscores their exclusivity, with access limited to 60-80 scholars annually under stringent oversight. Spanning parchments, codices, and modern files, the collection documents the Church's triumphs and trials, from theological debates to political maneuvers. The Reformation and Inquisition records in particular illuminate a Church at odds with itself, striving to maintain spiritual and temporal authority while confronting existential threats. These documents, preserved behind fortified doors, are not hidden to deceive, but protected to honor their complexity, awaiting a time when their truths can be fully understood. The Reformation, a schism unhealed. The seeds of discord. The 16th century Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther's 15 and 1795 theses, fractured Western Christianity, birthing Protestantism and challenging the Catholic Church's supremacy. The Vatican's secret archives preserve a lesser-known facet of this upheaval: secret exchanges between Luther and Vatican envoys, revealing desperate efforts to prevent the Catholic-Protestant split. Letters from 1516 to 1537, stored in sealed dossiers, document negotiations that could have altered history's course, but faltered under the weight of pride and power. Bishop Girolamo Aleandro's concessions. A key figure in these exchanges was Bishop Girolamo Aleandro, a papal envoy tasked with addressing Luther's challenge. His 1516 letters proposed theological concessions such as relaxing indulgences, payments for sin forgiveness, that Luther decried as corrupt. Aleandro suggested reforming their abuse while preserving papal authority, arguing for dialogue over condemnation. A 1517 memo notes Luther's initial receptiveness, suggesting a shared desire to reform the Church from within. However, these proposals, preserved in the archives, were overruled by a Vatican Council prioritizing doctrinal rigidity over compromise. Pride and power, the breaking point. By 1519, negotiations collapsed. Vatican records reveal a shift from conciliation to confrontation, as Pope Leo X issued Exsurge Domine, declaring Luther's teachings heretical. A cardinal's note: "We cannot bend lest we break," reflects the Church's fear of appearing weak. Luther's refusal to recant at the 1521 Diet of Worms mirrored the Church's intransigence. The archive's Reformation Diplomatica files document failed follow-up meetings, including a 1537 attempt in Regensburg, where envoys offered Luther a role in a reform council, only for mutual distrust to prevail. Sealed to avoid exposing the Church's vulnerabilities, these records reveal a missed opportunity for unity, the schism cemented by excommunication and division, a lasting wound. The Reformation records restricted to vetted scholars underscore a church divided not just by theology, but by human failings. The failure to reconcile with Luther deepened Christianity's fractures, leading to wars and cultural shifts. Yet the archives preserve the Church's regret, evident in a 1542 note. "We sought to save the flock, but lost half to the storm." These documents, silent for centuries, invite reflection on the cost of pride and the fragility of unity. The Inquisition doctrine versus freedom. The Inquisition's long shadow. From the 12th to 19th centuries, the Inquisition sought to protect Catholic orthodoxy, targeting heretics, dissenters, and intellectual rebels. The Vatican's secret archives house thousands of indictments, meticulously cataloged that document this campaign. These records, spanning the Spanish, Roman, and Portuguese Inquisitions, reveal the Church's conflict between safeguarding doctrine and suppressing freedom, often at a profound human cost. The trial of Giordano Bruno in 1600 stands as a stark example, its files exposing the moral dilemmas that haunted even the Church's enforcers. Giordano Bruno's defiant vision. Giordano Bruno, a Dominican friar and philosopher, was tried by the Roman Inquisition for advocating an infinite universe and questioning core doctrines like the Trinity. The Archives' 1600 trial records, spanning hundreds of pages, detail his interrogations where he defended his ideas with fervor. Bruno's assertion that the stars are worlds without end challenged the Church's geocentric cosmology, already strained by Copernicus and Galileo. The Inquisitor's notes, preserved in the Acta Inquisitionis, reveal their struggle. Bruno's brilliance was undeniable, yet his defiance threatened orthodoxy. A cleric's lament. A haunting note accompanies Bruno's verdict. "If we burn him, history will never forgive us." Penned by an unnamed cleric, it captures the moral anguish of executing a man whose ideas, though heretical, resonated with emerging truths. Bruno was burned at the stake in Rome's Campo de' Fiori, his execution a warning to dissenters. The archives preserve his final statement, "I die a martyr," and willingly alongside the Inquisitor's justifications, reflecting a church torn between enforcing unity and acknowledging doubt. These records, restricted to protect the Church's image, reveal not triumph, but tragedy. The Inquisition's broader toll beyond Bruno. The archives document countless others ensnared by the Inquisition. A 1321 file details the trial of a French woman, Marguerite Porret, executed for her mystical writings deemed too independent of church mediation. A 17th-century Spanish Inquisition log lists hundreds of conversos, Jews converted to Christianity, punished for suspected relapses, their pleas preserved in faded ink. These indictments, often accompanied by clerics' reflections on justice versus mercy, highlight the Church's relentless pursuit of conformity, tempered by moments of introspection. A legacy of regret. The Inquisition records, spanning 7 centuries, portray a church wielding immense power, yet haunted by its actions. A 1692 note from a Roman inquisitor questions, "Do we save souls by breaking them?" The archives preserve such doubts, suggesting a church aware of history's judgment, guarding these files to learn from its past mistakes. The Inquisition's legacy, etched in these pages, is one of authority secured at the cost of lives and ideas, a cautionary tale of faith's limits. The archives' role: preserving actions and regrets. Strict access and preservation. The Vatican's secret archives, limited access. Only 60-80 scholars annually reflects their delicate contents. Researchers must specify exact documents with no browsing permitted, ensuring the Reformation and Inquisition records remain closely guarded. This exclusivity protects the Church from exposing vulnerabilities, such as failed negotiations with Luther or the Church's moral compromises, while allowing controlled study of its history. A mirror of humanity. The Reformation and Inquisition sections reveal a Church striving for unity and purity, often at great cost. The secret exchanges with Luther show a willingness to compromise undone by institutional pride. The Inquisition's indictments, paired with clerics' regrets, expose the tension between faith and conscience. Together, these records portray a Church, both divine and divine, its actions preserved, alongside its reflections on their consequences. Historical insights and moral lessons. The history of these periods offers lessons for today. The Reformation's failure to bridge divides warns of the dangers of inflexibility, while the Inquisition's excesses highlight the perils of unchecked power. These records invite scholars to explore the complexities of faith authority and redemption. Conclusion. Truth's enduring echoes. The Vatican's secret archives, with their Reformation and Inquisition records, are a profound testament to the Catholic Church's struggle to maintain unity amid schism and dissent. These documents capture a Church navigating pride power and moral uncertainty. Preserved with care, sealed to shield vulnerabilities, they reveal not just actions, but regrets, offering a mirror to the Church's humanity. The archive's Latin motto, Veritas temporis est truth. Truth belongs to time, encapsulates their purpose to hold these truths until the world is ready to understand the cost of division and the hope of reconciliation. As silent witnesses to history, the archives remind us that even in faith's darkest moments, the seeds of reflection and renewal endure. The archives, a repository of global history. The Vatican's secret archives, formally organized in 1612, are the Pope's private collection distinct from the Church's public records. The Latin term, secretum, meaning private, reflects their exclusivity, with access granted to only 60 to 80 scholars annually under strict oversight. Spanning parchments, codices, and modern files, the archives document the Church's spiritual and temporal roles, from theological decrees to diplomatic correspondence. The colonialism records in particular expose the Church's dual legacy, a facilitator of European expansion and a platform for voices challenging its excesses. These documents, preserved in climate-controlled vaults, are not concealed to obscure history, but protected to preserve its nuances, awaiting a time when their truths can be fully understood. The papal bull Inter Caetera, faith as a tool of empire, dividing the New World. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI issued the papal bull Inter Caetera, a decree that profoundly shaped European colonialism. Preserved in the archive's Bullae Pontifici section, the bull divided the non-Christian world between Spain and Portugal, granting them exclusive rights to colonize lands west and east of a demarcated line in the Atlantic. This act, rooted in the Church's medieval authority over Christendom, politicized faith, positioning the papacy as an arbiter of global territories. The document's text, invoking the salvation of souls, reflects the Church's missionary zeal, but ignores the bloodshed that followed. Monarchs and missionaries. Accompanying Inter Caetera are letters between Pope Alexander VI and Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, preserved in the Correspondencia Regia files. These letters request protections for missionaries, emphasizing the spread of Christianity as a divine mandate. A 1494 missive urges Spain to plant the cross in the Americas, with no mention of indigenous peoples' rights or cultures. Portugal's King John II similarly pledged to evangelize Africa, as noted in a 1495 letter. But these exchanges prioritize imperial expansion over ethical concerns. The archives reveal a Church aligning with monarchs' ambitions, its silence on colonial violence starkly evident. A legacy of complicity. The Inter-Caetera records expose the Church's authority was leveraged to justify conquest, legitimizing the enslavement and displacement of millions. The bull's impact extended beyond the Americas, influencing colonial rivalries in Africa and Asia. Yet the archives do not glorify this role. They preserve it as a historical fact, inviting scrutiny of faith's entanglement with empire. A 16th century cleric's marginal note, questioning whether a papal line can divide human souls, hints at early unease, underscoring the Church's internal conflict. Indigenous voices, the cry for humanity. Bartolomé de las Casas Plea. Amid colonial atrocities, dissenting voices emerged, none more powerful than Father Bartolomé de las Casas, a Spanish Dominican. His 1537 letter to Pope Paul III, preserved in the archives Epistolae Missionariae, is a searing critique of Spanish conquests in the Caribbean. He describes the cruel and unjust enslavement of indigenous peoples, recounting massacres and forced labor in gold mines. Las Casas implores the Pope to condemn these acts, arguing that indigenous peoples are rational beings, deserving of dignity. His letter, written in urgent script, reflects a cleric's moral outrage, challenging the Church's complicity. Sublimis Deus, a bold declaration. In response, Pope Paul III issued Sublimis Deus in 1537, a brief preserved alongside Las Casas's letter. The decree declares indigenous peoples true men capable of receiving Christianity and prohibits their enslavement. This document, a landmark in human rights, asserts the Church's universal mission, rejecting colonial justifications for exploitation. However, the archives reveal its limited impact. Letters from Spanish officials dated 1538 dismiss Sublimis Deus as impractical, citing economic dependence on indigenous labor. A Vatican note acknowledges temporal pressures, undermining the decree, exposing the Church's struggle to enforce its moral stance. The dissenter's legacy. Las Casas' letter and Sublimis Deus represent a counter-narrative to colonial ambition, preserved as evidence of the Church's capacity for self-criticism. Other voices, like Jesuit missionary Antonio Ruiz de Montoya's 1639 report on Paraguayan abuses, echo Las Casas' pleas, forming a thread of dissent in the archives. These records, though marginalized in their time, highlight the Church's role as a moral conscience, even as it grappled with its own complicity. Asian missions faith meets resistance. Japan's Tokugawa shogunate. The archive's Misiones Orientales section documents the Church's 17th century efforts in Asia, where cultural resistance tested its adaptability. Letters with Japan's Tokugawa shogunate, preserved from 1610 to 1640, reveal tense negotiations. Jesuit missionary Francis Xavier's 1612 report describes early successes in Kyushu, but the shogunate's 1614 ban on Christianity prompted covert missions. A 1615 letter, hidden inside a wooden statue to evade detection, pleads for papal support as missionaries faced execution. These exchanges show the Church blending faith with political strategy, navigating a culture wary of foreign influence. Vietnam's cultural crossroads. In 18th century Vietnam, archived reports detail the Church's efforts amid Confucian and Buddhist traditions. A 1752 letter from Jesuit Alexandre de Rhodes describes baptizing thousands in Tonkin using Vietnamese script to translate prayers. However, a 1755 Vietnamese court decree, copied in the archives, restricts missionary activity, citing cultural disruption. Vatican responses urge discretion, advising missionaries to sow faith quietly. These records reflect the Church's pragmatic approach, balancing evangelization with respect for local customs to avoid persecution. Strategic evangelization. The Asian mission files highlight the Church's global ambition, tempered by cultural realities. Unlike the Americas, where colonial armies backed missionaries, Asia required diplomacy. A 1669 memo advises missionaries to wear the robes of the land, blending Christian symbols with local aesthetics. The archives preserve these strategies, revealing a church learning to adapt its failures and successes, etched in letters stained by travel and time. The archives' role: preserving a complex truth. Restricted access, enduring significance. The Vatican's secret archives' limited access, only 60 to 80 scholars, annually reflects the sensitivity of their colonial records. Researchers must request specific documents, with no browsing allowed, ensuring the Church's complicity and dissent are studied under controlled conditions. This exclusivity protects the archive's integrity while allowing glimpses into history's complexities, from Inter Caetera's imperial mandate to Las Casas' moral stand. Complicity and conscience. The colonialism records reveal a church both complicit in empire building and reflective of its wrongs. Inter Caetera and Monarch's letters expose faith's politicization, while Las Casas and Sublimis Deus assert indigenous humanity. Asian mission files show strategic evangelization, balancing zeal with cultural sensitivity. Together, these documents paint a church navigating power and morality, its actions preserved alongside its regrets. Lessons for today. The archive's colonial records offer lessons on the intersection of faith and power. The Church's role in legitimizing conquest warns of ideology's misuse, while dissenting voices inspire advocacy for justice. By preserving these truths, the archives invite scholars to explore the tension between institutional ambition and ethical responsibility, a dynamic still relevant in global discourse. Conclusion: truth's lasting echoes. The Vatican's secret archives, with their records of colonialism and global influence, are a profound chronicle of the Catholic Church's encounter with the world. From Inter Caetera's division of continents to Las Casas' cries for indigenous rights, from Japan's resistance to Vietnam's cautious embrace, these documents capture a church shaping and shaped by history. Preserved with care, they reveal complicity in empire, tempered by voices of conscience offering a complex truth about faith's global reach. The archive's motto, Veritas Temporis Est Truth, belongs to time, encapsulates their mission to hold these stories until humanity is ready to learn from the past, embracing both its shadows and its hopes for redemption. The archives, a chronicle of influence. The Vatican's secret archives, formally organized in 1612, are the Pope's private repository distinct from the Church's public records. The Latin term secretum, meaning private, underscores their exclusivity, with access limited to 60 to 80 scholars annually under rigorous oversight. Spanning parchments, codices, and typed reports, the archives document the Church's spiritual and temporal engagements, from theological decrees to diplomatic maneuvers. The Cold War and modern politics files, housed in secure vaults, illuminate the Vatican's role as a global player, leveraging its moral authority to influence events while safeguarding its institutions. These records, preserved with precision, offer a window into the Church's delicate dance between faith and pragmatism in a divided world. Poland and Solidarity, a covert crusade. John Paul II's Polish roots. The 1970s marked a turning point in the Vatican's Cold War engagement, driven by the election of Pope John Paul II in 1978, the first Polish pope. The Vatican's secret archives, Polonia Res files, document his covert support for Poland's Solidarity movement, a trade union that challenged communist rule. Born Karol Wojtyła. John Paul II's deep connection to Poland's anti-communist struggle is evident in secret memos from 1979 to 1989, preserved in the archives. These documents reveal a pope who saw solidarity not just as a political force, but as a moral uprising rooted in Christian values. Funds and intelligence. The archives detail the Vatican's clandestine aid to solidarity, including financial support and intelligence sharing. A 1980 memo outlines transfers of funds through Vatican bank accounts to Polish parishes, which funneled money to Solidarity organizers. Another document dated 1981 describes the Vatican relaying intelligence from Western diplomats about Soviet troop movements, helping Solidarity evade crackdowns. These actions, conducted under strict secrecy, reflect the Vatican's strategic use of its global network to bolster anti-communist resistance while avoiding direct confrontation with Moscow. A moral beacon, John Paul II's public actions complemented his covert efforts. His 1979 pilgrimage to Poland, documented in archived itineraries, drew millions with speeches calling for spiritual renewal, subtly endorsing Solidarity's cause. A 1983 memo notes the Vatican's coordination with U.S. and Italian officials to amplify Solidarity's message, though the Church maintained plausible deniability. The archives preserve a 1989 note reflecting on Solidarity's role in communism's collapse. Faith moved mountains, but only in silence. These records portray the Vatican as a soft power catalyst, its influence magnified by John Paul II's personal resolve. Latin America, cautious neutrality amid turmoil. Argentina's dirty war. The archives America's Latini files document the Vatican's response to Latin America's authoritarian regimes, particularly Argentina's dirty war, 1976-1983, and Chile's Pinochet era. In Argentina, the military junta's campaign against suspected leftists led to thousands of disappearances. Reports from Argentine bishops preserved from 1977 detail pleas for Vatican intervention to protect clergy and laypeople. A 1978 letter describes priests tortured for aiding refugees, urging Pope Paul VI to condemn the junta. The Vatican's response, a call for prayer and dialogue, reflects cautious neutrality, prioritizing the Church's safety over public confrontation. Chile's Pinochet regime. In Chile under Augusto Pinochet's regime, 1973 to 1990, similar dynamics unfolded. A 1979 report from Santiago's Archbishop notes the Church sheltering dissidents in parishes with coded messages to Rome, requesting funds for safe passage. However, the archives reveal the Vatican's reluctance to denounce Pinochet publicly. A 1980 memo advises discreet aid to avoid antagonizing the regime, which allowed Catholic schools to operate. This restraint, while protecting church institutions, drew criticism from liberation theologians, whose 1981 letter accuses the Vatican of abandoning the oppressed. Balancing act. The Latin American files highlight the Vatican's delicate balancing act. While quietly protecting priests, such as Argentine Jesuit Francisco Gialis, freed after Vatican backchannels in 1977, the Church avoided stances that could provoke reprisals. A 1983 note reflects on this strategy. To speak loudly risks the flock. To act silently saves the few. The archives preserve this tension, revealing a church navigating moral imperatives and institutional survival in a region torn by ideology and violence. Soviet Union diplomatic pragmatism. The Vienna meeting of 1962. The archives' Res Sovietica files document the Vatican's efforts to secure religious freedom in the Soviet Union, exemplified by a confidential 1962 meeting in Vienna. Preserved in detailed minutes, this dialogue between Vatican envoys and Soviet officials aimed to ease restrictions on Catholic worship in Eastern Europe. The Vatican proposed allowing bishops to operate in Ukraine, as noted in a 1962 memo, in exchange for avoiding anti-communist rhetoric. The Soviets, wary but pragmatic, agreed to limited concessions, such as permitting a Lithuanian seminary to reopen. Ostpolitik and quiet diplomacy. This meeting was part of the Vatican's Ostpolitik, a policy of détente, with communist states detailed in the archives from 1960-1989. A 1965 report describes secret channels with Moscow, including exchanges via neutral embassies in Bern. These efforts yielded modest gains, such as the 1971 release of a Ukrainian bishop, but faced internal church criticism. A 1963 cardinal's note warns that dealing with godless regimes taints our mission. Yet the archives show Pope John XXIII. His insistence on saving souls through patience. This pragmatism, balancing faith and diplomacy, defined the Vatican's Soviet strategy. A long game. The Soviet files reveal a Vatican playing a long game, prioritizing incremental gains over ideological battles. A 1980 memo reflects on Ostpolitik's success. We did not defeat communism. We outlived it. The archives preserve this quiet triumph, showcasing the Church's soft power approach, leveraging moral authority and discreet negotiations to protect its flock in a hostile landscape. The archives' role: preserving soft power, restricted access, global impact. The Vatican's secret archives' limited access, only 60 to 80 scholars annually, reflects the sensitivity of their Cold War records. Scholars must request specific documents, with no browsing permitted, ensuring the Vatican's political maneuvers remain closely guarded. This exclusivity preserves the integrity of files detailing covert aid, cautious neutrality, and diplomatic pragmatism, while allowing controlled study of the Church's global influence. A soft power actor, the Cold War files portray the Vatican as a master of soft power, wielding influence through moral suasion, strategic silence, and back-channel diplomacy. In Poland, it fueled resistance. In Latin America, it protected lives discreetly. In the Soviet Union, it secured concessions through patience. These records reveal a church balancing faith's ideals with survival's realities, its actions preserved as a testament to resilience in a polarized world. Lessons for modern politics. The archive's Cold War records offer insights for today's geopolitics, where soft power cultural and moral influence remains vital. The Vatican's ability to navigate ideological divides suggests the enduring value of diplomacy and restraint. By preserving these lessons, the archives invite scholars to explore how faith-based institutions can shape global outcomes without resorting to hard power. Conclusion: faith's enduring influence. The Vatican's secret archives, with their Cold War and modern politics files, chronicle the Catholic Church's role as a soft power actor in a divided world. From John Paul II's covert support for solidarity, to cautious neutrality in Latin America's turmoil, to pragmatic dialogues with the Soviet Union. These documents capture a church wielding influence through faith, diplomacy, and strategic silence. Preserved with care, they reveal the Vatican's delicate balance of spiritual mission and political survival, offering a complex portrait of its global legacy. The archive's motto, Veritas Temporis Est, truth belongs to time, encapsulates their purpose to hold these truths until humanity is ready to learn from the Church's quiet power, its triumphs, and its tempered regrets. The archives, a sanctuary of marginal voices. The Vatican's secret archives, formally established in 1612, are the Pope's private repository distinct from public church records. The Latin term secretium, meaning private, reflects their exclusivity, with access restricted to 60 to 80 scholars annually under strict oversight. Spanning parchments, codices, and typed files, the archives capture the Church's spiritual and temporal journey from papal decrees to personal reflections. The Mulieres in Silentio Ecclesiae collection, meticulously preserved, reveals women's roles as mystic scholars and advocates, often relegated to the margins, yet never erased. These records, guarded in climate-controlled vaults, are not hidden to suppress, but preserved to honor their quiet resilience, awaiting a time when their truths can be fully recognized. Hildegard von Bingen, a voice unsilenced, questioning male authorities. In the 12th century, Hildegard von Bingen, a German Benedictine abbess, emerged as one of the Church's most visionary figures. Her letters to Pope Eugenius III preserved in the Mulieres box, challenge the male monopoly on preaching. Written in 1148, one letter asks, "Why must women's voices pass through men when God speaks directly to us?" Hildegard's theological works, like Scivia's, were celebrated, yet her call for women to preach directly was met with silence. Not condemnation, but a refusal to engage. The Archives' preservation of her letters, unbound and fragile, reflects the Church's ambivalence, admiration for her intellect, caution toward her challenge. A legacy of influence, Hildegard's writings, copied by nuns across Europe, shaped medieval spirituality. A 1152 Vatican note praises her divine insight, but advises against elevating her authority, revealing the Church's reluctance to amplify female voices. The Mulieres collection includes her musical compositions, such as Ordo Virtutum, preserved as evidence of women's creative contributions. Hildegard's story, etched in the Archives, underscores a woman who spoke boldly within the Church's constraints, her legacy enduring despite institutional silence. Nune's writings, Tending the Unseen Flame, prayers and poems, from the 9th to 16th centuries, nuns across Europe crafted prayers and poems preserved in the Mulieres box as testaments to their quiet resilience. One 12th century prayer attributed to an anonymous French nun reads, "I ask, to tend the flame unseen where God's light burns without praise." These texts, often copied in convent scriptoria, circulated among women sustaining faith in cloistered communities. The Archives include a 14th century poem from an Italian nun. "My voice is soft, but heaven hears, reflecting women's spiritual agency despite their marginal status." A hidden network. The nuns' writings reveal a network of female solidarity preserved in letters exchanged between convents. A 1290 missive from a German abbess to her English counterpart shares strategies for educating girls defying restrictions on women's teaching. These documents, often written in coded language to evade scrutiny, highlight nuns' role as guardians of knowledge and faith. The Archives' inclusion of these texts, bound in simple vellum, affirms their significance, though a 15th century cleric's note dismisses them as women's trifles, revealing the Church's underestimation of their impact. Enduring resilience. The nuns' writings, spanning centuries, embody a quiet defiance. A 16th century Spanish nun's prayer, "Let my silence sing," where men forbid, captures their determination to contribute despite exclusion. The Mulieres collection preserves these voices, ensuring their legacy endures, a testament to women who shaped the Church from its margins. Heresy trials, women's spiritual defiance, Clara's martyrdom. The Mulieres box includes records of women tried for heresy, their stories revealing a bold assertion of spiritual authority. In 1321, Clara, a French laywoman, was executed for preaching without church approval. Her trial records, preserved in the Archives' Acta Inquisitionis document, her claim God's word needs no man's permission. Clara's defiance, rooted in her belief that women could interpret Scripture, challenged the Church's patriarchal structure. The Inquisitor's notes, conflicted between admiration and duty, reflect the threat posed by her charisma. Other defiant voices. Clara was not alone. A 1310 file details Marguerite Porret, burned for her mystical book, The Mirror of Simple Souls, which bypassed clerical mediation. A 14th century Italian woman, Napus Bonetta, faced trial for declaring herself a divine messenger, her testimony preserved, "As I speak what the Spirit wills." These records, often accompanied by clerics' reflections on their dangerous fervor, reveal women asserting spiritual roles at great risk. The Archives' preservation of their words, though marked heretica, honors their courage, even as the Church condemned them. A costly assertion. The heresy trials underscore the Church's fear of women's independent voices, yet the Mulieres collection frames them as martyrs of conviction. A 1322 Inquisitor's note laments, "We silence them, but their truth lingers. These records, restricted to protect the Church's authority, reveal a tension between control and the undeniable power of women's faith. Second Vatican Council advisory not decisive, a shift in roles. The Second Vatican Council 1962 to 1965, documented in the Archives Concilium Vaticanum II files, marked a turning point for women's roles in the Church. The Mulieres box includes records of discussions on women's participation, with laywomen invited as auditors for the first time. A 1963 memo notes their contributions to debates on education and social justice, praising their unique perspective. However, a 1965 note clarifies the limits. They may advise, but not decide, reflecting the Church's reluctance to grant women decision-making power. Voices heard, yet constrained. Women like Australian theologian Rosemary Goldie, whose 1964 speech on lay apostolates is preserved, influenced council outcomes, yet their roles remained advisory. The archives include letters from women auditors urging greater inclusion, with one 1965 plea stating, "We are half the Church. Let us shape it." The Vatican's response, a call for patience in tradition, underscores the slow pace of change. These files, preserved with annotations, reveal a Church grappling with modernity while clinging to patriarchal norms. A step forward. The Second Vatican Council's records in the Mulieres box mark progress, however limited. The inclusion of women auditors set a precedent for future engagement, preserved as a milestone in the Church's evolution. A 1966 reflection notes, "Their voices echo. Time will amplify them," hinting at the archive's role in safeguarding potential for change. Female deacons, an ongoing debate. A question reopened. In 2016, Pope Francis commissioned a study on female deacons documented in the Mulieres box, with redacted files. The archives preserve evidence of early Christian deaconesses, such as Phoebe in Romans 16:1, who served as ministers. A 2016 report cites 4th century texts describing women ordained for baptismal roles, sparking debate on restoring the diaconate. However, a redacted cardinal's note reads, "If a truth must be hidden because our structure cannot contain it, the fault is not in the truth," revealing resistance within the Church's hierarchy. Tensions and hopes. The female deacon files reflect ongoing tensions. A 2018 memo notes objections from conservative bishops, fearing a slippery slope to women priests, while supporters cite historical precedent. The archives preserve letters from women theologians like American Sister Elizabeth Johnson, urging the Church to embrace the Spirit's call. These documents, heavily restricted, underscore the Church's struggle to reconcile tradition with inclusivity, with the Mulieres box serving as a repository of unresolved questions. A future unwritten. The debate on female deacons, preserved in the archives, symbolizes women's persistent push for recognition. A 2019 note reflects, "The Church moves slowly, but the truth waits." The Mulieres collection, by safeguarding these discussions, ensures women's aspirations remain part of the Church's narrative, poised for future reckoning. The archives' role, preserving resilient voices, restricted access, lasting impact. The Vatican Secret Archives, limited access, only 60-80 scholars annually, reflects the sensitivity of the Mulieres in Silentio Ecclesiae collection. Scholars must request specific documents, with no browsing permitted, ensuring women's contributions are studied under controlled conditions. This exclusivity protects the Church's image, while allowing glimpses into the resilience of female voices, from Hildegard's letters to modern deacon debates, marginal yet enduring. The Mulieres records affirm women's enduring contributions to the Church, despite their marginalization. Hildegard's challenges, nuns' prayers, Clara's defiance, Vatican II's auditors, and deacon advocates form a continuum of resilience. These documents, preserved with care, reveal a Church shaped by women's faith, even as it restricted their authority. Lessons for today. The Mulieres collection, offers lessons on inclusion and perseverance. Women's quiet contributions warn against overlooking the marginalized, while their bold assertions inspire advocacy for equality. By preserving these voices, the archives invite scholars to explore the tension between tradition and justice, a dynamic vital to the Church's future. Conclusion: voices that endure. The Vatican's secret archives, with their mulieres in Silentio Ecclesia box, are a testament to women's enduring presence in the Catholic Church. From Hildegard's bold questions, to nuns' unseen prayers from Clara's martyrdom, to modern debates on deacons, these records capture voices that shaped faith from the margins. Their legacy, a beacon of hope and transformation. The archives, a fortress of discretion. The Vatican's secret archives, formally organized in 1612, are the Pope's private repository distinct from public church records. The Latin term secretum, meaning private, underscores their exclusivity, with access limited to 60-80 vetted scholars annually under stringent oversight. Spanning parchments, codices, and modern files, the archives capture the Church's spiritual and temporal journey, from theological decrees to sensitive investigations. The Delicta Reservata section, housed in secure vaults, documents crimes reserved for papal or high-level ecclesiastical judgment, often involving clergy or Vatican citizens. These cases, governed by canon law and the 1929 Lateran Treaty, reflect the Vatican's unique legal status as a sovereign entity, allowing internal resolution to avoid public scandal. The archives preserve these records not to conceal, but to protect the Church's sanctity, revealing a complex interplay of justice and discretion. The framework of reserved crimes. Canon law and sovereignty. Reserved crimes, or delicta reservata, are offenses deemed so grave or sensitive that they fall under the direct authority of the Pope or designated tribunals, as outlined in the 1983 Code of Canon Law. These include violations like sacrilege, apostasy, and certain moral or financial misconduct by clergy. The 1929 Lateran Treaty, which established Vatican City as a sovereign state, grants the Vatican jurisdiction over its citizens and territory, enabling internal handling of crimes without external judicial interference. The archive's Delicta Reservata files, often marked Reservatissimo for utmost secrecy, document these cases, prioritizing the peace of the faithful over public disclosure. Internal resolution. The Vatican's preference for internal resolution stems from its dual role as a spiritual and temporal authority. Public trials risk undermining the Church's moral credibility, especially in cases involving clergy. The archives reveal a consistent pattern: investigations conducted by the Apostolic Penitentiary or Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, closed trials and resolutions like laicization, confinement, or resignation. A 1930 Vatican memo preserved in the Delicta section articulates this approach. To expose our wounds invites chaos. To heal them quietly preserves faith. These records, restricted to protect institutional stability, offer insight into the Church's silent justice. 1969 Relic theft, a monk's misguided faith. The crime. In 1969, a Benedictine monk stationed at the Basilica of St. Paul, outside the walls, stole relics of St. Lawrence, a 3rd century martyr. The Delicta Reservata file, labeled Furta Sacra 1969, details the incident. The monk, claiming divine whispers urged him to liberate the relics for private veneration, hid them in his cell. Discovered during a routine inspection, the theft shocked the Vatican, as relics are sacred objects central to Catholic devotion. The archives preserve the monk's written confession, scrawled in Latin, admitting his act, but insisting on divine inspiration. Closed trial and mercy. The case was handled internally under canon law, with a closed trial conducted by the Apostolic Penitentiary. The archive's trial records, spanning 50 pages, include testimonies from fellow monks describing the suspect's erratic behavior and mystical claims. The tribunal ruled the theft a delictum gravius, grave offense, but noted the monk's mental instability. Rather than excommunication, he was laicized, stripped of clerical status, and sent to a lay monastery for reflection. A 1969 note from the presiding cardinal emphasizes mercy. He sought God in error. We guide him back with compassion. The relics were restored, and the incident remained undisclosed to avoid undermining trust in the clergy. A lesson in faith. The relic theft case, preserved in faded ink, reflects the Vatican's approach to internal crimes: swift resolution with minimal publicity. The archive's inclusion of the cardinal's note suggests a church aware of its human frailties, choosing rehabilitation over condemnation. This file, restricted to protect the monk's identity, underscores the tension between justice and mercy in handling misguided faith. 1982. Murder tragedy in the Vatican Gardens. The incident. In 1982, a rare act of violence shook Vatican City, documented in the Delicta Reservata file. Castel AG 82. A Vatican citizen's son, a 19-year-old seminarian, was found dead in the Vatican Gardens, strangled after an apparent altercation. The suspect, a mentally unstable gatekeeper employed by the Vatican, was detained within hours. The archive's 400-page dossier, marked Summum Secretum, details the investigation conducted by the Vatican's Gendarmerie Corps. Witness statements describe the gatekeeper's erratic behavior, including claims of demonic visions prompting the attack. Internal confinement. Under the Lateran Treaty, the Vatican exercised jurisdiction, avoiding Italian authorities. The archives reveal a closed tribunal overseen by the promoter of justice, which declared the gatekeeper unfit for public trial due to his mental state. Instead of imprisonment, he was confined to a Vatican-run facility for the mentally ill, a decision noted as preserving the peace of the faithful. A 1982 memo explains to err. This tragedy risks scandal. To resolve it, quietly honors the victim's memory. The victim's family, Vatican citizens, received private compensation, as documented in a sealed agreement. A silent scar. The Castel AG 82 file, heavily restricted, reflects the Vatican's prioritization of institutional stability over transparency. The archives preserve the victim's obituary, penned by a Vatican priest, alongside the gatekeeper's medical records, revealing a church grappling with human tragedy. A 1983 reflection notes, "Violence in our garden reminds us, even here, we are not immune to sin." This case, resolved in silence, underscores the Vatican's commitment to internal justice, even at the cost of public scrutiny. 2009-2011. Money laundering, the Vatican bank's shadow. Financial misconduct. Between 2009 and 2011, the Vatican Bank Istituto per le Opere di Religione faced allegations of money laundering, documented in the Delicta Reservata file. Pecunia 2009-11. The archives detail negligence in monitoring financial transfers, with millions of euros moving through untracked accounts, some linked to Italian organized crime. A 2010 report from the Vatican's Financial Information Authority, preserved in the archives, flags irregular transactions violating international anti-money laundering standards. The scandal, initially uncovered by Italian regulators, pressured the Vatican to reform its banking practices. Quiet resignation. The Vatican handled the crisis internally, avoiding external prosecution under its sovereign status. The archives records show the Vatican Bank's director was quietly asked to resign in 2011 with no public announcement. A 2011 memo notes his departure was for the good of the Church, accompanied by a cryptic reflection: "We carry the wound in silence." The Vatican implemented reforms, including stricter oversight, as documented in a 2012 policy draft. The archives also preserve correspondence with the Council of Europe's Moneyval Committee, reflecting the Vatican's efforts to align with global standards while maintaining autonomy. A financial reckoning. The money laundering case preserved in detailed ledgers reveals the Vatican's vulnerability to financial misconduct and its preference for discreet resolution. The archive's inclusion of the director's resignation letter expressing regret humanizes the scandal while the Church's reforms signal accountability. This file, restricted to protect reputations, underscores the Vatican's challenge of upholding moral authority in a complex financial world. Emanuela Orlandi, an unresolved mystery. The disappearance. In 1983, Emanuela Orlandi, a 15-year-old Vatican citizen, vanished after a music lesson in Rome, sparking one of the Vatican's most enduring mysteries. The Delicta Reservata file, Orlandi 1983, marked Reservatissimo, documents the case which remains unresolved. Initial reports preserved in the archives detail the Vatican's cooperation with Italian police, including searches and public appeals. However, a 1985 top-secret note reveals a chilling claim. An anonymous source alleged Orlandi was alive, held for political leverage in a plot linked to Cold War tensions, possibly involving the Vatican's anti-communist stance. Silence to avoid chaos. The archives show the Vatican chose silence, fearing public disclosure could incite chaos or endanger Orlandi. A 1985 memo advises to speak risks her life. To wait preserves hope. Subsequent files, heavily redacted, mention unverified leads, including a 1990 claim tying her case to Turkish operatives seeking leverage for a jailed assassin. The Vatican's internal investigation conducted by the Secretariat of State yielded no resolution, and the case remains open. The archives preserve Orlandi's school records and a family photo humanizing a tragedy that haunts the Church, a lingering wound. The Orlandi file, among the most restricted in the Delicta Reservata section, reflects the Vatican's struggle with an unresolved crime. The decision to prioritize stability over transparency, as noted in a 1995 reflection, her absence tests our faith in justice, underscores the Church's protective instincts. The archive's preservation of this mystery, alongside prayers for Orlandi's safety, reveals a Church bearing the weight of uncertainty, its silence, a heavy burden. The archive's role: preserving silent justice, restricted access, delicate truths. The Vatican's secret archives, limited access, only 60-80 scholars, annually reflects the sensitivity of the Delicta Reservata files. Scholars must request specific documents, with no browsing permitted, ensuring cases like the relic theft, murder, money laundering, and Orlandi's disappearance are studied under controlled conditions. This exclusivity protects the Church's moral foundation while allowing glimpses into its internal justice system, balancing justice and mercy. The Delicta Reservata records reveal a Church prioritizing internal resolution to maintain its sanctity. The 1969 relic theft shows mercy for a misguided monk. The 1982 murder prioritizes peace over publicity. The 2009-2011 financial scandal reflects quiet accountability. And Orlandi's case underscores the cost of silence. These files, preserved with annotations, portray a Church navigating human frailty, its actions tempered by a commitment to faith stability. Lessons for transparency. The reserved crimes offer lessons for the modern Church, where transparency is increasingly demanded. The Vatican's internal approach, while effective in preserving authority, risks alienating the faithful, as seen in Orlandi's unresolved case. The archives invite scholars to explore the tension between discretion and openness, a dynamic vital to the Church's future credibility. Conclusion: Truth's quiet keeper. The Vatican's secret archives, with their Delicta Reservata files, are a profound chronicle of the Catholic Church's silent justice. From a monk's relic theft, to a tragic murder from financial missteps, to Emanuela Orlandi's enduring mystery, These records capture a church resolving crimes internally to protect its moral foundation. Preserved with reverence, they reveal the Vatican's delicate balance of justice, mercy, and institutional survival, offering a complex portrait of faith in a flawed world. The archive's motto, Veritas Temporis Est, truth, belongs to time, encapsulates their mission to hold these truths until humanity is ready to understand the Church's quiet wounds, its resolve, and its hope for redemption. Michelangelo's sketch, A Figure in Darkness. The human divine, Michelangelo Buonarroti, renowned for the divine grandeur of the Sistine Chapel, is an unlikely candidate for the Deposito's shadows. Yet one of his sketches, a figure shrouded in darkness, resides there deemed too human for public display. Unlike the celestial figures of the Sistine Chapel, this sketch portrays a solitary, introspective figure, possibly a self-portrait or a study for a larger work. Its somber tone and lack of divine radiance contrast sharply with Michelangelo's public oeuvre, which exalts the glory of God and humanity's place in the divine order. The sketch's raw, emotional depth, with its heavy shading and ambiguous expression, suggests a moment of personal doubt or vulnerability, qualities the Church found unsettling. During the Renaissance, the Church sought art that reinforced spiritual certainty, not introspection, that bordered on existential questioning. This work, though masterfully executed, was likely withheld for its failure to align with the idealized, triumphant imagery expected of sacred art. Artistic significance. Michelangelo's sketch is a rare glimpse into the artist's private thoughts, revealing a side of his genius that diverges from his public commissions. The figure's humanity, its lack of divine embellishment, challenges the Renaissance ideal of the artist as a conduit for divine inspiration. Scholars suggest this sketch may have been a preparatory study for a larger work, possibly a Pietà or a depiction of Christ. But its stark realism and emotional ambiguity made it unsuitable for ecclesiastical approval. Its preservation in the Deposito underscores the Church's ambivalence toward art that prioritizes human experience over theological certainty. Raphael's Hidden Madonna, Theological Tensions. A pregnant virgin, Raphael Sanzio, celebrated for his serene Madonnas and harmonious compositions, also has a work tucked away in the Deposito, a painting of a pregnant Virgin Mary holding a crucifix. This piece, striking in its tenderness and realism, was withheld for its theological inconsistency. The depiction of Mary as visibly pregnant, combined with the crucifix, a symbol of Christ's death, created a juxtaposition that unsettled Church authorities. The image risked conflating the joy of the Annunciation with the sorrow of the crucifixion, blurring the clear narrative progression of Christian theology. The painting's composition, with Mary's gentle gaze and the crucifix cradled protectively, is a masterpiece of emotional nuance. Yet its deviation from the standard iconography of the Virgin, typically portrayed as serene, youthful, and unburdened by the weight of the Passion, made it problematic. The Church, particularly during the Counter-Reformation, prioritized art that adhered to strict doctrinal guidelines, avoiding ambiguity that could confuse the faithful. Cultural context. Raphael's painting reflects the Renaissance tension between artistic innovation and religious orthodoxy. As artists began exploring more humanized depictions of sacred figures, they often clashed with the Church's desire for uniformity. This Madonna, with its bold theological statement, represents Raphael's attempt to reconcile human experience with divine mystery, an attempt that proved too radical for its time. Its exclusion from public view highlights the Church's role as a gatekeeper of religious imagery, ensuring that only works reinforcing official doctrine reach the faithful. Caravaggio's St. Peter, the Fisherman's Truth, a saint without sanctity. Caravaggio, the master of chiaroscuro and dramatic realism, is no stranger to controversy. His depiction of St. Peter, hidden in the Deposito, portrays the apostle not as a sanctified figure, but as a weathered working-class fisherman. With calloused hands, a lined face, and a posture that speaks of toil, this St. Peter lacks the haloed reverence of traditional hagiography. The Church, seeking to elevate its saints as exemplars of divine grace, found this portrayal too earthy, too devoid of the sanctity expected of apostolic imagery. Caravaggio's St. Peter is a testament to his commitment to truth over idealization. The painting's stark realism, with its focus on the apostle's humanity rather than his spiritual elevation, aligns with Caravaggio's broader artistic philosophy. His works often provoked discomfort among ecclesiastical patrons who preferred art that glorified rather than humanized. This painting, likely intended for a church altar, was quietly relegated to the Deposito, its raw power deemed incompatible with the Church's vision. Artistic rebellion. Caravaggio's St. Peter embodies the Baroque artist's challenge to artistic conventions. By portraying the apostle as an ordinary man, Caravaggio emphasized the accessibility of sanctity, a radical notion in an era when the Church sought to maintain a clear hierarchy between the divine and the mundane. The painting's exclusion from public view reflects the Church's unease with art that democratized holiness, suggesting that divine grace could reside in the ordinary. Its preservation, however, indicates an acknowledgement of Caravaggio's genius, even if his vision was too bold for public consumption. Non-Western visions, African and Asian Virgin Mary sculptures, diversity and devotion. Among the Deposito's most intriguing holdings are sculptures of the Virgin Mary, crafted by African and Asian artists. These works, created during periods of missionary expansion, depict Mary in culturally specific forms, her features reflecting the artist's indigenous traditions rather than Western iconography. An African virgin might bear the regal posture of a tribal queen, adorned with intricate beadwork, while an Asian virgin could embody the serene elegance of Buddhist statuary with almond-shaped eyes and flowing robes. These sculptures were excluded from display, not for lack of artistry, but for their deviation from the uniformity of Western Christian iconography. The Church, particularly during the colonial era, sought to standardize religious imagery, to reinforce a cohesive Catholic identity. Non-Western depictions, though reverent, were seen as too foreign, potentially diluting the universal image of Mary, as defined by European tradition. Cultural significance. These sculptures represent a fascinating intersection of faith and culture, where local artists infused Christian themes with their own aesthetic and spiritual traditions. Their exclusion from public view reflects the Church's historical prioritization of cultural hegemony over inclusivity. Yet their preservation in the Deposito suggests a recognition of their artistic and spiritual value, even if they were deemed unsuitable for public worship. These works challenge modern viewers to reconsider the boundaries of sacred art and the Church's role in shaping global Christian identity. The Church's curation art as doctrine, balancing inspiration and control. The Deposito Pittorico Riservato is more than a collection of rejected artworks. It is a reflection of the Church's complex relationship with art as a tool for spiritual instruction. Throughout history, the Church has used art to communicate divine truths, inspire devotion, and assert authority. However, this role as patron also required it to act as censor, ensuring that art adhered to theological and cultural standards. The works in the Deposito by Michelangelo Raphael Caravaggio and non-Western artists represent moments when artistic vision pushed against these boundaries, challenging the Church's control over sacred imagery. The decision to preserve rather than destroy these works suggests a nuanced approach. While the Church deemed them unsuitable for public display, it recognized their artistic merit and historical significance. This preservation reflects an acknowledgement that art, even when controversial, holds enduring value. The Deposito thus serves as a repository of both caution and reverence, safeguarding works that might one day be re-evaluated. Historical context. The exclusion of these artworks must be understood within their historical context. During the Renaissance and Baroque periods, the Church faced significant challenges: Protestant Reformation, internal corruption, and the rise of humanism that heightened its sensitivity to artistic expression. The Council of Trent, 1545–1563, formalized guidelines for sacred art, emphasizing clarity, decorum, and fidelity to doctrine. Works that deviated from these standards, like those in the Deposito, were often sidelined to avoid confusion or controversy among the faithful. The legacy of the hidden masterpieces. Rediscovering the unseen. The Deposito Pittorico Riservato remains largely inaccessible to the public, its contents known only through limited scholarly accounts. Yet the existence of these hidden masterpieces raises profound questions about the role of art in religious life. What does it mean for a work of genius to be deemed unfit for public view? How do these suppressed visions reshape our understanding of artists like Michelangelo, Raphael, and Caravaggio? And what do the non-Western sculptures tell us about the global reach of Christianity and its encounters with diverse cultures? In recent years, there have been calls to open the Deposito to scholars and potentially the public. Such access could spark new conversations about the intersection of art, faith, and power. These works, though hidden, continue to speak, offering insights into the human condition, the evolution of religious thought, and the enduring tension between creativity and authority. A call for reflection. The hidden masterpieces of the Deposito Pittorico Riservato invite us to reflect on the delicate balance between artistic freedom and institutional control. They remind us that art, at its best, challenges assumptions, provokes thought, and pushes boundaries. By preserving these works, the Church has ensured their survival, even if their stories remain untold. As we contemplate their significance, we are reminded that beauty, truth, and faith are not always in perfect harmony, but it is in their tension that art finds its deepest meaning. Conclusion. The power of the unseen. The Deposito Pittorico Riservato stands as a silent witness to the power of art to both inspire and unsettle. Its hidden works, Michelangelo's introspective sketch, Raphael's theological Madonna, Caravaggio's earthy St. Peter, and the culturally diverse Virgin Mary sculptures represent a dialogue between creativity and doctrine that continues to resonate. These masterpieces, though unseen, are not forgotten. They await rediscovery, offering a window into the complexities of faith, art, and human expression. In their shadows, we find not only the Church's caution, but also the enduring brilliance of artists who dared to see the divine through a human lens. The Galileo Affair, a clash of worldviews, the heliocentric debate. In 1616, the Catholic Church found itself at the heart of a scientific storm, the Galileo Affair. The Specula Vaticana's files document a pivotal moment when Galileo Galilei's advocacy for heliocentrism, Copernicus's theory that the Earth orbits the Sun, challenged the Church's geocentric worldview rooted in Ptolemaic astronomy and biblical interpretations. Among these records is a lesser-known account of a priest, unnamed in the documents, who questioned why Scripture remained silent on scientific matters, suggesting that divine revelation might not encompass the mechanics of the cosmos. This priest's inquiry, though marginal at the time, reflects an undercurrent of intellectual curiosity within the Church. The official response, however, was less open. The Congregation of the Index condemned heliocentrism as heretical, and Galileo was instructed to abandon his support for it. The Specula's records capture the tension of this period. Theological rigidity clashed with emerging empirical evidence. As clerics debated whether Scripture should dictate astronomical truth or serve as a guide for spiritual, not scientific understanding. Historical context and legacy. The Galileo affair, often portrayed as a simple conflict between science and religion, was far more nuanced. The Spicola's documents reveal a church divided, not uniformly opposed to science, but wary of its implications for authority. The priest's questioning of Scripture's scientific silence hints at an early recognition that faith and reason might occupy separate domains. Galileo's eventual trial in 1633 and house arrest marked a low point in this dialogue. But the Spicola's preservation of these records suggests an institutional willingness to reflect on its own history, even its missteps. The affair's legacy shaped the Church's approach to science for centuries. It highlighted the risks of dogmatic resistance to empirical evidence and set the stage for later efforts to reconcile faith with scientific progress. The Specola Vaticana's archives, by preserving these debates, serve as a historical mirror reflecting both the Church's caution and its capacity for self-examination. Benedict XIV's draft. An unfulfilled reconciliation, a papal vision suppressed. In 1741, Pope Benedict XIV drafted a document that could have altered the course of the Church's relationship with science, a call to rehabilitate Galileo. The Specola Vaticana's files contain this unpublished manuscript, a remarkable artifact of a pope's attempt to mend the rift caused by the Galileo affair. Benedict, known for his intellectual rigor and openness to Enlightenment ideas, proposed acknowledging Galileo's contributions and re-evaluating the Church's stance on heliocentrism. The draft argued that scientific inquiry could coexist with faith provided it did not challenge core theological truths. Yet the document was never published. The Specula's records offer no definitive explanation, but scholars speculate that resistance from conservative factions within the Church, combined with political pressures, led Benedict to shelve the initiative. The draft's existence, however, is a testament to the Church's internal debates about science during the Enlightenment, a period when reason was increasingly celebrated, yet still viewed with suspicion by religious authorities. Significance of the draft. Benedict XIV's unpublished draft represents a missed opportunity for early reconciliation between the Church and the scientific community. Its call for Galileo's rehabilitation foreshadowed later efforts to bridge faith and reason, such as Pope John Paul II's 1992 apology for the Church's handling of the Galileo case. The document's preservation in the Specola Vaticana underscores the Church's complex relationship with science. Even when bold ideas emerged, institutional caution often prevailed. This draft, though hidden for centuries, highlights the potential for progressive thought within the Church, even in an era of entrenched tradition. The 20th century embracing the cosmos. Eclipse expeditions of 1935. By the 20th century, the Church's engagement with science had evolved significantly, as evidenced by the Specola Vaticana's records of its 1935 eclipse expeditions. These expeditions, organized to observe solar eclipses in remote locations, marked a proactive effort to contribute to astronomical research. The Specola's astronomers, often Jesuit priests trained in both theology and science, collaborated with international observatories, demonstrating the Church's growing acceptance of empirical methods. The 1935 expeditions, documented in detailed logs, included observations of solar coronae set and precise measurements of celestial phenomena. These efforts were not merely scientific. They were symbolic of the Church's desire to reclaim a role in the study of the heavens, once a domain of ecclesiastical authority. The Specula's participation in global scientific endeavors signaled a shift from defensive caution to active engagement, positioning the Church as a partner in the pursuit of cosmic knowledge. Quantum Physics Symposia, 1921. The Specola Vaticana's files also chronicle its 1981 Symposia on Quantum Physics, a bold step into the realm of modern science. These gatherings brought together theologians, physicists, and philosophers to discuss the implications of quantum mechanics for understanding the universe and its origins. The records reveal spirited debates about probability causality and the nature of reality topics that resonated with theological questions about divine order and human free will. The symposia, initiated under Pope John Paul II, reflected the Church's willingness to engage with cutting-edge science, even when it raised challenging philosophical questions. By fostering dialogue between scientists and clerics, the Specula positioned itself as a mediator between empirical inquiry and spiritual reflection, seeking to harmonize the probabilistic world of quantum mechanics with the certainties of faith. NASA correspondence blessing the moon missions. A leap for faith and science. Among the Specula Vaticana's most striking records is a 1962 correspondence with NASA, in which the Vatican offered its blessing for the Apollo moon missions. This exchange, initiated during the pontificate of Pope John XXIII, reflects a moment of remarkable alignment between the Church and the era's most ambitious scientific endeavor. The Specula's astronomers expressed enthusiasm for space exploration, viewing it as an extension of humanity's God-given curiosity to explore the cosmos. The correspondence includes letters from Vatican astronomers congratulating NASA on its achievements and affirming the compatibility of space exploration with Christian theology. One document quotes Psalm 8:3-4, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon, and the stars, which you have set in place as evidence of divine endorsement for humanity's lunar ambitions." This blessing marked a significant departure from the Church's earlier caution embracing science as a means of glorifying creation. Symbolic harmony. The Vatican's support for the moon missions symbolized a broader reconciliation between faith and science. By endorsing NASA's efforts, the Church signaled its acceptance of humanity's quest to explore the unknown, provided it was pursued with humility and reverence. The Specula's role in this exchange underscores its function as a bridge between the sacred and the scientific, fostering a dialogue that celebrated both the mysteries of the cosmos and the truths of faith. The Church's evolving stance, balancing reason and belief. A cautious embrace. The Specula Vaticana's records reveal a Church that has over centuries moved from confrontation to collaboration with science. The Galileo affair exposed the risks of rigid dogma, while Benedict XVII's unpublished draft hinted at the potential for reconciliation. The 20th century's eclipse expeditions and quantum physics symposia demonstrated a proactive engagement with scientific progress, and the NASA correspondence showcased a willingness to embrace exploration as a spiritual endeavor. Together, these moments illustrate a trajectory of cautious but steady openness to reason. This evolution reflects the Church's recognition that science and faith need not be adversaries. By preserving records of both its triumphs and its struggles, the Specula Vaticana acknowledges the complexity of this relationship. The archives serve as a historical ledger, documenting the Church's efforts to balance its role as a guardian of spiritual truth with its curiosity about the natural world. The role of the Specula Vaticana, founded to study the stars and refute accusations of scientific backwardness, the Specula Vaticana has become a symbol of the Church's commitment to intellectual inquiry. Its astronomers, often priests with advanced scientific training, embody the synthesis of faith and reason. The Specula's archives, by preserving the Church's scientific history, invite reflection on how institutions adapt to new knowledge while remaining anchored in tradition. The legacy of the Specula Vaticana. A window to the cosmos. The Specula Vaticana's files offer more than a historical record. They provide a window into the Church's ongoing dialogue with the cosmos. From the debates of the Galileo affair to the blessings of the moon missions, these documents reveal a Church wrestling with its place in a rapidly changing world. They challenge the narrative of science and religion as perpetual foes, highlighting moments of collaboration, curiosity, and mutual enrichment. Today, the Specula continues its work conducting research and fostering dialogue between scientists and theologians. Its archives, though not fully accessible to the public, hold the potential to deepen our understanding of how faith and reason coexist. As humanity ventures further into the cosmos, exploring exoplanets, black holes, and the origins of the universe, the Spicola Vaticana remains a quiet but vital voice, advocating for a vision of the universe where science and spirituality converge. A call for openness. The Spicola's records remind us that the pursuit of knowledge, whether scientific or spiritual, is a shared human endeavor. The Church's cautious embrace of astronomy reflects a broader truth. Progress often requires navigating tension, embracing uncertainty, and learning from past mistakes. By preserving these stories, the Specula invites us to consider how we too can balance reason and belief in our quest to understand the universe. Conclusion: faith among the stars. The Spicola Vaticana's archives tell a story of a church that, despite its historical caution, has sought to engage with the cosmos in meaningful ways. From the priest who questioned Scripture's silence to the astronomers who blessed the moon missions, these records reveal a journey of reconciliation between faith and science. The Specula stands as a beacon of this dialogue, reminding us that the stars, like faith, inspire both wonder and inquiry. As we gaze upward, the Church's celestial legacy encourages us to seek truth in both the heavens and the heart, forging a path where reason and belief illuminate the vastness of creation. The Archives, a repository of global dialogue. The Vatican's secret archives, formally organized in 1612, serve as the Pope's private repository distinct from public church records. The Latin term secretum, meaning private, underscores their exclusivity, with access limited to 60 to 80 scholars annually under stringent oversight. Spanning parchments, codices, and modern documents, the archives capture the Church's spiritual and temporal endeavors, from theological treatises to diplomatic correspondence. The Res Diplomaticae ex Oriente et Borea files, stored in climate-controlled vaults, document exchanges with non-Christian powers, revealing the Vatican's role as a global diplomatic actor. These records, preserved with precision, are not hidden to obscure history, but protected to honor its complexity, offering a window into the Church's efforts to bridge cultural divides through dialogue. The Vatican's diplomatic tradition, a universal mission. The Catholic Church's diplomatic tradition stems from its universal mission to spread faith and foster peace, as articulated in the 1983 Code of Canon Law. The Vatican, as a sovereign entity under the 1929 Lateran Treaty, maintains diplomatic relations with states and engages non-state powers, including non-Christian empires. The Res Diplomaticae files reflect this mission, documenting negotiations that prioritize mutual respect over conversion, often in the face of ideological or religious resistance. A 16th-century Vatican memo preserved in the collection states, "To speak with those unlike us is to sow seeds for eternity." This ethos guides the Church's approach as seen in its exchanges with diverse powers. Challenges of non-Christian engagement. Engaging non-Christian powers posed unique challenges, from linguistic barriers to theological mistrust. The archives reveal the Vatican's use of intermediaries, Jesuit missionaries, local clergy, or neutral diplomats to facilitate dialogue. These exchanges, often conducted in secrecy to avoid political backlash, required patience and cultural sensitivity. The Res Diplomaticae files, marked with annotations like "sub silentio" in silence, underscore the Vatican's discreet approach, preserving its moral authority while navigating complex geopolitical landscapes. Ottoman Empire, 1584. A cautious pact. Sultan Murad III's proposal. In 1584, the Vatican received a proposal from Sultan Murad III of the Ottoman Empire, documented in the Res Diplomaticae file, Ottomanica, 1584. The Sultan, seeking to strengthen trade with Christian Europe, offered a commercial pact guaranteeing safe passage for Venetian and Genoese merchants through Ottoman ports. The archives preserve Murad's letter written in ornate Arabic script, promising peaceful commerce under the crescent and cross. The proposal, mediated by Venetian envoys, was cautiously welcomed by Pope Gregory XIII, who saw economic benefits but feared Ottoman expansion. Vatican's response. The archives detail the Vatican's deliberations, preserved in a 1584 council report. Cardinals debated the pact's implications with some warning of entangling faith with infidels. A Jesuit advisor's note argues for acceptance, citing the potential to protect Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. The Vatican agreed to the pact with conditions Ottoman authorities would safeguard Christian shrines, as documented in a 1585 addendum. The archives include a papal letter to Murad expressing hope for mutual prosperity, reflecting diplomatic restraint over evangelization. A fragile accord. The Ottoman Pact, though limited, marked a rare collaboration between the Vatican and a Muslim power. The archive's Ottomanica files note its success in easing trade, but highlight tensions as Ottoman raids persisted in the Mediterranean. A 1587 reflection laments, "We trade, but trust eludes us." This record, preserved in faded parchment, reveals the Vatican's pragmatic diplomacy, prioritizing dialogue despite religious divides, though constrained by mutual suspicion. Qing Dynasty, 17-13. The Chinese rights controversy. Cultural compromise sought. In 1713, the Vatican engaged the Qing Dynasty to resolve the Chinese rights controversy, a dispute over whether Confucian rituals were compatible with Catholicism. The Res Diplomaticae file, Sinica, 1713, documents these talks initiated by Jesuit missionaries in Beijing. Emperor Kangxi, intrigued by Jesuit astronomy, allowed negotiations with Vatican envoys to clarify Catholic practices. The archives preserve a 1713 letter from a Jesuit proposing that ancestral veneration be deemed cultural, not religious, to ease conversions. The Vatican under Pope Clement XI sought a compromise to sustain its Chinese mission. Tensions and breakdown. The archives reveal resistance from Vatican theologians who viewed Confucian rites as idolatrous. A 1714 report preserved in the Sinica files details Clement XI's decree Ex illa die, banning the rites which strained relations with Kangxi. A 1715 imperial edict copied in the archives restricts Jesuit activity, accusing the Vatican of disrespecting our ancestors. The Vatican's response, a 1716 letter urging patience in faith, failed to restore dialogue. A cardinal's note reflects, "We sought a bridge but built a wall," highlighting the cultural missteps that thwarted compromise. A cultural lesson. The Sinica 1713 files underscore the Vatican's challenge of engaging a Confucian society. The archive's preservation of Kangxi's edict and Jesuit letters reveals a church learning to navigate cultural differences, though its rigid stance hindered progress. Its 2020 reflection notes, "To understand China, we must listen, not dictate." This record, restricted to protect missionary efforts, showcases the Vatican's patient diplomacy, even in failure as a step toward future dialogue. Russian Tsars, 1860. Seeking Orthodox reconciliation, a fractured Christianity. In 1860, the Vatican sought to reconcile with the Russian Orthodox Church separated from Rome since the 1054 schism. The Res Diplomaticae file, Rossica, 1860, documents exchanges with Tsar Alexander II's court mediated by Polish Catholic bishops. The archives preserve a 1860 Vatican letter proposing dialogue on shared doctrines like the Eucharist to ease tensions in Russian-controlled Poland. Alexander II, wary of Catholic influence, responded cautiously as noted in a 1861 imperial memo, allowing limited Catholic worship but rejecting theological talks. Resistance and stalemate. The archives reveal Orthodox resistance rooted in historical mistrust. A 1862 report from a Vatican envoy describes Russian clergy denouncing Rome as heretical. The Vatican's offer to recognize Orthodox sacraments preserved in a 1863 draft was ignored with a Tsarist advisor, noting unity with Rome weakens our crown. The archives include a 1864 papal reflection. We extend a hand, but they see a chain. This stalemate, exacerbated by Russia's suppression of Polish Catholics, halted reconciliation efforts, as documented in faded correspondence. A persistent hope. The Rosica 1860 files reflect the Vatican's long-term vision for Christian unity, despite failure. The archives' preservation of these exchanges, including Orthodox rebuttals, reveals a church committed to dialogue across religious divides. A 1865 note hopes time may heal what pride divides. This record, restricted to avoid inflaming tensions, underscores the Vatican's patient diplomacy planting seeds for future ecumenical efforts. Vietnam, 1954. Observing silent faith. Post-Geneva Accords. In 1954, following the Geneva Accords that partitioned Vietnam, the Vatican sent secret envoys to observe Catholic life under Communist North Vietnam. Documented in the Res Diplomaticae file, Vietnamica 1954. The archives preserve reports from these envoys disguised as aid workers, noting the resilience of Catholic communities. A 1954 letter describes villagers in Hanoi holding clandestine masses, their silent faith defying government restrictions. The Vatican, cautious after the Accords, avoided public advocacy to protect Catholics from reprisals. Diplomatic restraint. The archives detail the Vatican's discreet engagement with North Vietnamese officials. A 1955 memo records a meeting in Hanoi where envoys requested leniency for Catholic clergy, offering humanitarian aid in exchange. The communist regime, suspicious of foreign influence, permitted limited worship, as noted in a 1956 report, but monitored churches closely. The Vatican's response, a 1957 letter urging prudence in persecution, reflects its strategy of quiet diplomacy to safeguard its flock. A bishop's note observes, "Their faith burns in shadows. We must not expose it." A resilient community. The Vietnamica 1954 files highlight the Vatican's role in supporting Catholics under adversity. The archives' preservation of envoy reports, including sketches of hidden altars, humanizes the struggle of Vietnam's faithful. A 1958 reflection notes, "Their silence speaks louder than our words." This record, restricted to protect ongoing missions, showcases the Vatican's patient diplomacy, prioritizing survival over confrontation in a divided nation. The archives' role: preserving diplomatic patience, restricted access, global insights. The Vatican's secret archives' limited access, only 60-80 scholars, annually reflects the sensitivity of the Res Diplomaticae ex Oriente et Borea files. Scholars must request specific documents with no browsing permitted, ensuring exchanges with the Ottoman Empire, Qing dynasty Russian czars, and Vietnam are studied under controlled conditions. This exclusivity preserves the Church's diplomatic legacy while allowing glimpses into its global engagement. Dialogue across divides. The Res Diplomaticae records reveal a Church committed to dialogue despite cultural and religious divides. The Ottoman Pact shows economic pragmatism. The Qing talks reflect cultural missteps. Russian efforts highlight ecumenical hope, and Vietnam's observations underscore resilient faith. These files, preserved with annotations, portray a Vatican balancing spiritual ideals with diplomatic realities, its patience a testament to its universal mission. Lessons for modern diplomacy. The Res Diplomaticae files offer lessons for today's interconnected world where cultural divides persist. The Vatican's approach, listening, adapting, and persevering, suggests the value of patient diplomacy in bridging differences. The archives invite scholars to explore how faith-based institutions can foster dialogue, a dynamic vital to global peace. Conclusion. Truth's patient voice. The Vatican's secret archives, with their Res Diplomaticae ex Oriente et Borea files, are a profound chronicle of the Catholic Church's diplomacy with non-Christian powers. From a 1584 Ottoman Pact to 1713, Qing negotiations from 1860, Russian overtures to 1954, Vietnamese observations, these records capture a church seeking dialogue across cultural divides. Preserved with reverence, they reveal the Vatican's patient diplomacy, balancing faith's mission with pragmatic engagement. The archive's motto, Veritas Temporis Est, truth, belongs to time, encapsulates their purpose to hold these stories until humanity is ready to learn from the Church's quiet pursuit of understanding its triumphs and its enduring hope for unity. The Miracle of Fatima, 1917. Visions and Discernment. The event and its witnesses. In 1917, the small Portuguese village of Fatima became the site of one of the most famous Marian apparitions in history. 3 shepherd children, Lucia dos Santos and her cousins Jacinta and Francisco Marto, reported visions of the Virgin Mary, who delivered messages of prayer, repentance, and peace. The events culminated in the miracle of the sun, witnessed by thousands, where the sun reportedly danced in the sky. The Supernaturalis Recensio's files on Fatima document consistent witness accounts, from the children's detailed testimonies to corroborating reports from diverse onlookers, including skeptics. The Vatican's investigation, initiated shortly after the events, focused on the coherence and consistency of these accounts. The children's simplicity and lack of motive for deception lent credibility to their claims, while the mass-witnessed solar phenomenon defied easy explanation. In 1930, the Church declared the Fatima apparitions worthy of belief, approving them for private devotion, but stopping short of mandating belief, a hallmark of the Supernaturalis Recensio's cautious approach. Theological and cultural impact. The Fatima case highlights the Church's nuanced stance on supernatural claims. By approving the apparitions for devotion but not requiring belief, the Vatican preserved the mystery of the event, while avoiding dogmatic overreach. The messages of Fatima, emphasizing prayer and penance, aligned with Catholic teachings, reinforcing their acceptance. However, the Supernaturalis Recensio's records note debates over the solar miracle's nature, with some investigators proposing natural explanations like atmospheric phenomena. This tension underscores the Church's commitment to evidence-based discernment, even when affirming the supernatural. Fatima's legacy endures in global Catholic devotion, with millions visiting its shrine annually. The Supernaturalis Recensio's approval, grounded in rigorous evaluation, ensured that Fatima became a beacon of faith without compromising the Church's credibility. The case exemplifies how the Vatican balances reverence for the divine with a demand for consistency and coherence. Lourdes, 1858. The Healing Waters. Inexplicable recoveries. In 1858, Bernadette Soubirous, a young peasant girl in Lourdes, France, reported visions of a woman identifying herself as the Immaculate Conception. While the visions drew attention, it was the inexplicable healings associated with a spring uncovered by Bernadette that captured the Supernaturalis Recensio's focus. The Vatican's files document a meticulous investigation, prioritizing medical evidence over visionary claims. Over decades, thousands reported cures, but only a select few, 68 by 2025, were officially recognized as miraculous after exhaustive scrutiny. The Supernaturalis Recensio collaborated with the Lourdes Medical Bureau, an independent body of physicians, to evaluate claims. Cases required verifiable medical diagnoses, evidence of instantaneous or inexplicable recovery, and sustained health improvements. For example, a 19th century case involved a woman with advanced tuberculosis who regained full health after bathing in the spring, defying medical expectations. The Vatican's records emphasize that these healings, not Bernadette's visions, formed the basis for Lourdes' recognition as a miraculous site. Scientific rigor in a spiritual context. The Lourdes investigation reflects the Supernaturalis Recensio's emphasis on empirical evidence. Unlike Fatima, where witness consistency was key, Lourdes required medical documentation and expert testimony. The Church's willingness to subject claims to scientific scrutiny, even at the risk of rejecting them, demonstrates its commitment to credibility. The Supernaturalis Recensio's files note that Bernadette's humility and lack of personal gain bolstered her credibility. But the healing's inexplicability was the decisive factor. Lourdes remains a global pilgrimage site with millions seeking its healing waters. The Supernaturalis Recensio's rigorous process ensured that only the most compelling cases were validated, preserving the site's spiritual significance, while grounding it in verifiable evidence. This balance of faith and reason has made Lourdes a model for the Church's approach to miracles. Akita, 1973, The Weeping Statue. A prolonged investigation. In 1973, a convent in Akita, Japan, became the site of an extraordinary phenomenon. A wooden statue of the Virgin Mary reportedly wept tears, some of blood, witnessed by nuns and visitors. The Supernaturalis Recensio's files document a 20-year investigation reflecting the Vatican's deliberate pace in evaluating supernatural claims. Samples of the tears were analyzed, revealing human-like fluid, and multiple witnesses, including non-Catholics, confirmed the phenomenon. The statue wept over 100 times between 1975 and 1981, under close observation. The Vatican's investigation concluded in 1993, approved the Akita events for private devotion, citing the phenomenon's consistency and the absence of natural explanations. The Supernaturalis Recensio's records highlight the involvement of scientists who ruled out fraud or mechanical tampering, and theologians who assessed the messages allegedly received by Sister Agnes Sasagawa for theological consistency. The messages warning of spiritual trials aligned with Catholic doctrine, supporting the case's approval. Cultural and global significance. The Akita case is notable for its non-Western context, reflecting the Church's global reach. The Supernaturalis Recensio's files reveal sensitivity to cultural differences, with investigators consulting Japanese experts to ensure accurate interpretation of the phenomenon. The prolonged scrutiny spanning 2 decades underscores the Vatican's reluctance to rush judgment, prioritizing evidence over the emotional weight of a weeping statue. The approval of Akita, like Fatima, was cautious, affirming the event's spiritual value without mandating belief. Akita's recognition strengthened Catholic devotion in Asia, where Christianity is a minority faith. The Supernaturalis Recensio's thorough process ensured that the case was not dismissed as local superstition, but evaluated as a potential sign of divine presence, demonstrating the Church's ability to adapt its methods to diverse cultural contexts. Rejected cases, the 1966 hoax and beyond. Unmasking fabrication. Not all claims withstand the Supernaturalis Recensio's scrutiny. A notable example is a 1966 case documented as a hoax, where a small European parish reported a statue emitting light and speaking. The Vatican's investigation, detailed in the archives, revealed inconsistencies in witness testimonies, evidence of tampering with the statue, and financial motives among key claimants. With what the files describe as clinical precision, The Supernaturalis Recensio dismissed the case, citing fabricated evidence and lack of supernatural indicators. The 1966 hoax is one of many rejected claims in the archives, which include alleged visions, healings, and relics exposed as fraudulent. The Supernaturalis Recensio's process involves cross-referencing testimonies, consulting experts, and examining physical evidence. Cases are rejected when natural explanations, psychological, environmental, or deceptive, outweigh supernatural possibilities. The archives note that such rejections protect the Church's credibility, preventing the faithful from being misled by false miracles. The cost of discernment. The rejection of fraudulent claims highlights the Supernaturalis Recensio's role as a guardian of authenticity. By dismissing hoaxes, the Church reinforces the sanctity of genuine miracles, ensuring that devotion is rooted in truth. However, this rigor can disappoint communities invested in local claims, as seen in the 1966 case, where the parish faced division after the Vatican's ruling. The Supernaturalis Recensio's commitment to evidence over sentiment reflects its broader mission to preserve the mystery of the divine without succumbing to credulity. The Vatican's process. Evidence over emotion, a rigorous methodology. The Supernaturalis Recensio's evaluation process is a model of disciplined inquiry. Claims undergo multiple stages. Initial reports are collected from witnesses, followed by interviews to assess credibility and consistency. Physical evidence, such as relics or medical records, is subjected to scientific analysis, often by independent experts. Theological review ensures alignment with doctrine, while psychological evaluations rule out mental instability or delusion. The process documented in the archives can span years or decades, reflecting the Church's refusal to hasten judgments. This methodology prioritizes evidence over emotional appeal, a principle evident in all cases. Fatima's approval rested on consistent testimonies, Lourdes on medical inexplicability, and Akita on prolonged observation. Conversely, the 1966 hoax was rejected for its lack of verifiable evidence. The Supernaturalis Recensio's files emphasize that miracles must transcend natural explanations, a high bar that preserves the extraordinary nature of divine intervention. Balancing faith and skepticism. The Church's approach reflects a delicate balance. It affirms the possibility of miracles, while subjecting claims to rigorous scrutiny. This balance protects the faithful from exploitation, while honoring the mystery of the divine. The Supernaturalis Recensio's records reveal internal debates among investigators, with some advocating for stricter standards and others for greater openness to the supernatural. This tension underscores the Church's dual role as a spiritual authority and a discerning institution. The legacy of the Supernaturalis Recensio. Preserving the sacred. The Supernaturalis Recensio's work extends beyond individual cases. It shapes the Church's relationship with the miraculous in a skeptical age. By validating events like Fatima, Lourdes, and Akita, the Vatican affirms the possibility of divine intervention, offering hope to the faithful. By rejecting hoaxes, it safeguards its credibility, ensuring that miracles remain rare and extraordinary. The archives, though largely inaccessible, hold a wealth of insight into how the Church navigates the intersection of faith, science, and human experience. The section's legacy lies in its ability to adapt ancient beliefs to modern scrutiny. In an era of scientific advancement, the Supernaturalis Recensio demonstrates that faith can coexist with reason provided. Both are approached with humility. Its records invite reflection on the nature of miracles, not as spectacles, but as signs of a deeper reality discerned through patience and rigor. A call for discernment. The Supernaturalis Recensio challenges us to approach the supernatural with both openness and skepticism. Its meticulous process reminds us that truth, whether divine or human, requires careful discernment. As the Church continues to evaluate claims of miracles, its archives stand as a testament to the enduring quest to understand the divine in a world of uncertainty. Conclusion. The mystery endures. The Supernaturales Recensio embodies the Catholic Church's commitment to truth in the face of the extraordinary. Through cases like Fatima Lourdes Akita and the rejection of hoaxes, it navigates the delicate boundary between faith and evidence, preserving the mystery of the divine without succumbing to haste or sentiment. These records hidden within the Vatican's walls reveal a church that reveres the miraculous, but demands authenticity. As we reflect on these stories, we are reminded that the supernatural, when genuine, points beyond itself to a reality where faith and reason converge in awe of the divine. The origins of the prophecy. A 12th century vision. The prophecy of the popes is traditionally attributed to Saint Malachy, an Irish archbishop known for his piety and reformist zeal in the 12th century. According to legend, during 1139 pilgrimage to Rome, Malachy experienced a vision of future popes, from which he composed a list of 112 Latin mottos, each corresponding to a pontiff from his time until the end of the papacy. The manuscript, however, first surfaced in 1595, published by Arnold Wyon, a Benedictine monk, in his book Lignum Vitae. This late appearance, over 400 years after Malachy's death, raises questions about its authenticity. The Vatican's records note early skepticism about the manuscript's origins. Some scholars, both within and outside the Church, suggest it was a 16th century forgery, possibly crafted to influence a papal conclave. The motto's accuracy for popes before 1595 is notably precise, while those for later pontiffs often require creative interpretation. The Supernaturales Recensio, the Vatican section for evaluating supernatural claims, has never authenticated the prophecy, but its preservation in the archives indicates a reluctance to dismiss it outright. Historical context. The 1595 publication emerged during a turbulent period for the Church, marked by the Counter-Reformation and political intrigue. The manuscript's appearance coincided with the 1590 conclave, leading some to speculate it was designed to favor a particular candidate. The Vatican's internal records, while not confirming this theory, acknowledge the prophecy's convenient timing. Despite doubts, the document's mystique grew fueled by its eerie alignments with certain popes and its apocalyptic tone, which resonated with a church grappling with external threats and internal divisions. The motto's patterns and interpretations. Early accuracy. Lumen in Kylo and beyond. The prophecy's 112 mottos are short, enigmatic Latin phrases such as ex castro Tiberis, from the castle of the Tiber, or pastor et nauta, shepherd and sailor. Vatican records map these to specific popes, with some connections appearing remarkably apt. For example, the motto Lumen in Caelo, light in the sky, is linked to Pope Leo XIII, 1878-1903, whose family crest featured a comet, a celestial light. Similarly, Pastor et Nauta is associated with Pope John XXIII, 1958-1963, who was Patriarch of Venice, a city of canals, and known for his pastoral leadership. These early alignments, particularly for popes before the 19th century, lend the prophecy an aura of credibility. The Vatican's archives document internal discussions among theologians who noted these correspondences, with some arguing they reflect divine foresight. However, the records also reveal a growing skepticism as later mottos become less precise, requiring increasingly speculative interpretations to fit historical popes. Weakening connections. By the 20th century, the prophecy's accuracy wanes. Mottos like Flos Florum, flower of flowers, for Pope Paul the West in 1963-1998 are linked tenuously to his coat of arms, which featured fleur-de-lis symbols. Similarly, De Medietate Lunae, of the half-moon for Pope John Paul I, 1978, is tied to his brief 33-day pontificate, likened to a lunar cycle. But critics argue this stretches credulity. The Supernaturalis Recensio's 1978 memo penned during the year of 3 popes explicitly criticized these later interpretations as retrospective, suggesting they were shaped to fit events after the fact. The memo preserved in the Vatican's archives reflects a scholarly consensus that the prophecy's predictive power diminishes over time. Investigators noted that the motto's vagueness allows for flexible interpretation, a hallmark of apocryphal prophecies. Yet the Church's reluctance to denounce the prophecy outright suggests a strategic choice to avoid alienating those who find spiritual meaning in its cryptic phrases. The final prophecy, Peter the Roman, an apocalyptic vision. The prophecy's final line is its most provocative. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will reign Peter the Roman, who will feed his flock amid many tribulations, after which the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge the people. This ominous prediction tied to the 112th Pope has fueled speculation about the end of the papacy and Rome itself. The election of Pope Francis in 2013 as the 112th Pope in some interpretations intensified these concerns, particularly among those who see his Argentine origins or Jesuit background as loosely connected to Peter the Roman. The Vatican's records reveal heightened scrutiny following Francis's election. Internal correspondence notes the prophecy's resurgence in public discourse, with some faithful interpreting global events, political unrest, environmental crises, as signs of the predicted tribulation. However, the Church has consistently downplayed the prophecy's significance, emphasizing that it lacks canonical authority and should not be treated as doctrine. The Church's response. The Vatican's cautious approach to the final prophecy reflects a broader strategy of managing apocalyptic narratives. A 2013 memo drafted shortly after Francis's election reiterated the 1978 dismissal of the prophecy as retrospective, but advised against public condemnation. The document cites the risk of fueling apocalyptic fears, which could undermine the Church's message of hope and stability. Instead, the Vatican has opted to monitor the prophecy's cultural impact, preserving it as a monitored myth within the Supernaturalis Recensio's purview. This measured response underscores the Church's awareness of the prophecy's emotional and spiritual resonance. By neither endorsing nor rejecting it outright, the Vatican maintains a delicate balance, allowing the faithful to engage with the prophecy as a point of reflection while discouraging eschatological panic. The Vatican's stance, pragmatism and mystery. A 1978 memo and institutional caution. The 1978 memo, a pivotal document in the Vatican's archives, encapsulates the Church's skepticism toward the prophecy of St. Malachy. Written during a year of papal upheaval following the deaths of Paul VI and John Paul II and the election of John Paul II, the memo argues that the prophecy's apparent accuracy stems from retrospective interpretation, not divine inspiration. It points to the motto's ambiguity and the human tendency to find patterns in vague predictions, a phenomenon known as apophenia. Despite this skepticism, the memo advises against public denunciation, citing the prophecy's deep roots in Catholic culture. The Vatican's records reveal a pragmatic approach by preserving the manuscript and monitoring its influence. The Church acknowledges its historical significance without granting it theological weight. This strategy reflects a broader pattern in the Supernaturalis Recensio's handling of supernatural claims, where evidence and caution take precedence over sentiment. Balancing faith and reason. The prophecy of St. Malachy poses a unique challenge for the Church. It is neither a miracle requiring validation nor a hoax warranting dismissal. Its ambiguous status allows it to persist as a cultural artifact, sparking devotion and debate without threatening core doctrines. The Vatican's archives document internal discussions about its theological implications, with some theologians viewing it as a reminder of the Church's eschatological hope, while others see it as a distraction from authentic faith. The Church's refusal to denounce the prophecy outright reflects its sensitivity to the faithful's spiritual imagination. By preserving the manuscript and engaging with its interpretations, the Vatican demonstrates a willingness to tolerate mystery, provided it does not undermine its authority or incite fear. Cultural and historical significance. A persistent fascination. The prophecy of Saint Malachi has captivated audiences beyond the Catholic Church, influencing literature, media, and popular culture. Its cryptic mottos and apocalyptic tone resonate with a human desire to find meaning in history's unfolding. The Vatican's records note its popularity during times of crisis, such as wars or papal transitions, when speculation about the next pope or Rome's fate intensifies. This enduring fascination underscores the prophecy's power as a narrative, even if its historical accuracy is questionable. The prophecy's cultural impact is evident in its influence on Catholic devotion. Shrines books and online forums dedicated to decoding the mottos reflect a grassroots engagement that the Vatican monitors but does not suppress. The Supernaturalis Recensios files include reports on these trends, indicating an awareness of the prophecy's role in shaping lay spirituality, a mirror of Catholic identity. The prophecy also serves as a mirror for the Church's evolving identity. Its early mottos, with their striking alignments, evoke a time when the Church held sway over both spiritual and temporal realms. The later, vaguer mottos reflect a modern era where the Church navigates a pluralistic world wary of apocalyptic narratives that could destabilize its mission. By preserving the prophecy, the Vatican acknowledges its historical role while asserting control over its interpretation. The legacy of the prophecy. A monitored myth. The prophecy of Saint Malachi remains a monitored myth within the Vatican's archives, a term used in internal records to describe phenomena that are neither endorsed nor rejected, but kept under observation. Its presence in the Supernaturalis Recensio reflects the Church's broader approach to the supernatural, rigorous scrutiny, tempered by an openness to mystery. The prophecy's survival, despite its questionable origins, speaks to the Church's ability to adapt to changing cultural and spiritual landscapes. The prophecy's legacy lies in its ability to provoke reflection on the nature of prophecy itself. Is it a divine blueprint or a human construct? The Vatican's cautious stance suggests that the answer lies in discernment, not certainty. By preserving the manuscript, the Church ensures that future generations can grapple with these questions, balancing faith with critical inquiry. A call for reflection. The prophecy of Saint Malachi invites us to consider the interplay between prophecy, history, and faith. Its mottos, whether inspired or invented, challenge us to seek meaning without succumbing to fear or fantasy. The Vatican's measured response, neither dismissing nor endorsing the prophecy, offers a model for navigating uncertainty in a world hungry for signs. As Pope Francis's pontificate continues, the prophecy remains a quiet presence, reminding us that the future, like the divine, is both mysterious and open to interpretation. Conclusion. An enduring enigma. The prophecy of Saint Malachi, with its cryptic mottos and apocalyptic finale, is a testament to the Catholic Church's complex relationship with the supernatural. From the striking accuracy of Lumen and Caelo to the speculative links of later popes, the prophecy weaves a narrative that is as compelling as it is contentious. The Vatican's cautious handling, evident in the 1978 memo and its response to Pope Francis's election, reflects a commitment to preserving mystery without fueling fear. Housed in the Supernaturalis Recensio, the prophecy endures as a monitored myth, inviting reflection on the nature of divine foresight and human hope. As we ponder its cryptic lines, we are reminded that the Church, like the prophecy itself, navigates the unknown with a blend of faith, reason, and enduring wonder. The Archives. A repository of wartime truths. The Vatican's secret archives, formally organized in 1612, serve as the Pope's private repository distinct from public church records. The Latin term secretum, meaning private, underscores their exclusivity with access limited to 60 to 80 scholars annually under stringent oversight. Spanning parchments, codices, and typed documents, the archives capture the Church's spiritual and temporal journey from papal encyclicals to diplomatic dispatches. The Archivio Pio XII, open to researchers in 2020, contains thousands of files from Pius XII's papacy 1939 to 1958, offering unparalleled insight into the Vatican's wartime role. These records, stored in climate-controlled vaults, are not concealed to obscure history, but protected to preserve its complexity, revealing a church grappling with survival and morality amid global catastrophe. The context of Pius XIV's papacy, a world at war, elected in March 1939. Just months before World War II began, Pope Pius XII faced a church encircled by totalitarian regimes, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and the Soviet Union. The Archivio Pio XX files reflect his diplomatic background as a former nuncio, shaping a strategy of neutrality to protect the Church's global flock. The archive's Contesto Storico section notes Pius XV's belief that public condemnation could provoke reprisals against Catholics, particularly in occupied territories. A 1939 memo states, "Our voice must heal, not wound," encapsulating his cautious approach. The Holocaust's moral challenge. The Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others, posed an existential moral challenge. The Archivio Pio XX documents the Vatican's awareness of Nazi atrocities, with reports from bishops and nuncios detailing deportations as early as 1941. Yet Pius XV's public silence, contrasted with private actions, remains a point of contention. The archives reveal a church torn between moral outrage and pragmatic survival, its decisions preserved as a testament to the era's complexities. Unanswered pleas, 1942. Jewish communities' cries, desperate appeals. In 1942, as the Holocaust intensified, Jewish communities across Europe sent urgent pleas to the Vatican, documented in the Archivio Pio XIII file, Appelli Ebraici, 1942. These letters, preserved in multiple languages, begged Pius XIII to affirm their humanity and condemn Nazi persecution. A June 1942 appeal from Warsaw's Jewish Council, smuggled via a Polish priest, describes death trains to Treblinka imploring papal intervention. Another from Amsterdam's Jewish leaders requests a public statement to stay the hand of evil. The archives preserve these pleas, often annotated with urgente in red ink, highlighting their gravity. The Vatican's silence. The archives reveal Pius XII's decision to remain silent publicly, a choice explained in a 1942 memo from the Secretariat of State. To speak openly risks Catholic lives in German hands. Private responses preserved in the files offered prayers and vague assurances of spiritual support, but no concrete action. A cardinal's note reflects the Vatican's dilemma. Their suffering breaks our heart, but our voice could break our flock. The silence intended to protect left Jewish communities feeling abandoned, as noted in a 1943 letter from a rabbi we called, and Rome was mute, a lasting controversy. The Appelli Ebraici files, restricted to vetted researchers, underscore the moral cost of Pius XII's caution. The Vatican's failure to publicly affirm Jewish suffering fueled criticism, though defenders argue it preserved the Church's ability to act covertly. A 1944 reflection in the archives laments silence saves some, but history judges. These records, preserved with care, preserve the raw pain of unanswered pleas, inviting scrutiny of the Church's wartime choices. Nazi contacts, 1939. Diplomacy over condemnation. Early exchanges. From 1939, The Vatican maintained diplomatic channels with Nazi Germany documented in the Contatti Germaniae 1939 file. These exchanges, initiated through the Apostolic Nuncio in Berlin, aimed to protect Catholic clergy and institutions under Nazi control. A September 1939 letter requests exemptions for Catholic schools, citing the 1933 Concordat. The archives reveal Germany's evasive replies, preserved in typed dispatches, prioritizing Nazi ideology over religious concessions. Pius XI's decision to engage diplomatically rather than condemn reflects his belief in preserving the Church's presence, as noted in a 1940 memo, "We negotiate to endure." Limits of neutrality. As Nazi atrocities escalated, the Vatican's diplomacy grew strained. A 1941 report from the Nuncio details Kristallnacht's aftermath, urging a papal protest, but Pius XIV declined, fearing reprisals. The archive's Contatti files show continued exchanges into 1943, with the Vatican securing minor concessions like the release of a dozen priests in 1942. However, a 1943 note admits, "Their promises are shadows. Their evil grows." The Vatican's neutrality preserved in these dispatches prioritized institutional survival over moral confrontation, a choice that remains divisive. A diplomatic tightrope. The Contatti Germaniae files reveal a church walking a tightrope using diplomacy to mitigate harm while avoiding outright condemnation. The archive's preservation of these exchanges, alongside internal critiques, highlights Pius XI's pragmatic approach, tempered by growing awareness of its limits. A 1944 reflection states, "We spoke softly, perhaps too softly." This record, restricted to protect historical sensitivities, underscores the Vatican's delicate balance of power and morality. Secret efforts, 1943-1944. Convents as sanctuaries. Hidden rescues. Despite public silence, Pius XIII authorized secret efforts to protect Jews, documented in the Operatio Refugiati, 1943-1944 files. From 1943-1944, convents, monasteries, and Vatican properties across Italy hid thousands of Jews from Nazi deportations. The archives preserve directives from the Secretariat of State instructing religious houses to open doors to the persecuted. A 1943 letter to Rome's convents marked strictly confidential orders, the sheltering of those in mortal danger, with no explicit mention of Jews, to avoid detection. These efforts, coordinated by Pius XIV's aides, saved an estimated $4,000 to $6,000 lives, as noted in a 1945 report. Silent protection. The archives detail the risks taken by religious communities. A 1944 report from a Franciscan convent describes hiding 50 Jewish children disguised as orphans, with nuns facing Gestapo searches. The Vatican provided funds and false baptismal certificates preserved in coded ledgers. Public silence was maintained to protect these operations, as a 1943 memo explains, "To speak risks all we shield." The archives include testimonies from survivors collected post-war praising the Church's hidden courage, though many remained unaware of Pius XIV's role. A quiet legacy. The Operatio Refugiati files, restricted to protect living descendants, reveal a church acting decisively in secret while maintaining public neutrality. The archive's preservation of these records, including nuns' diaries, humanizes the Vatican's efforts, contrasting with its silence. A 1946 reflection notes, "We saved whom we could, but not enough." This legacy, preserved in faded ink, underscores the tension between covert action and public accountability. Undelivered speeches, 1942. Words unspoken, drafts of condemnation. In 1942, Pius XII drafted speeches condemning Nazi atrocities, preserved in the Discorsi non pronunziati 1942 files. These texts, written in Italian and Latin, explicitly denounce crimes against humanity and the slaughter of innocents. A December 1942 draft, intended for a Christmas address, calls for justice for the persecuted race, a clear reference to Jews. The archives include annotations by Pius XIII, questioning whether delivery would provoke greater evil. These speeches, never delivered, reflect the Pope's moral anguish, tempered by strategic caution. Reasons for silence. The archives reveal the Vatican's rationale for withholding these speeches. A 1942 memo from the Secretariat of State cites reports of Nazi reprisals against Dutch Catholics after a bishop's protest with 40 priests deported. Fearing similar consequences, Pius XIII opted for general appeals for peace, as seen in his 1942 Christmas message preserved in the Discorsi Publici files, which condemns atrocities without naming perpetrators. A cardinal's note reflects, "Words could cost lives. Silence might save them." The archive's preservation of these drafts, alongside deliberations, highlights the Church's internal conflict. A missed opportunity. The Discorsi non pronunziati files, among the most poignant in the Archivio Pio Dei, reveal a Church poised to speak but restrained by fear. The undelivered speeches restricted to protect Pius XII's legacy fuel debate over whether a public stand could have altered history. A 1943 reflection laments, "We wrote the truth, but locked it away." These records, preserved with care, invite scrutiny of the moral weight of silence. The archive's role. Preserving a complex legacy. Restricted access moral questions. The Vatican's secret archives' limited access, only 60 to 80 scholars annually, reflects the sensitivity of the Archivio Pio Dei files. Scholars must request specific documents with no browsing permitted, ensuring wartime actions are studied under controlled conditions. This exclusivity protects the Church's reputation while allowing rigorous examination of Pius XIII's decisions, from unanswered pleas to secret rescues. Balancing survival and morality. The Archivio Pio Dei records portray a Church balancing survival and morality. Unanswered Jewish pleas and Nazi contacts highlight caution. Secret convent efforts show courage. Undelivered speeches reveal suppressed outrage. These files, preserved with annotations, depict Pius XIII as a leader navigating impossible choices, his silence both protective and costly. A 1945 note reflects, "We walked through fire, but did we light the way?" Lessons for today. The Archivio Pio Dei offers lessons on moral leadership in crisis. Pius XII's caution warns of the risks of silence, while his secret actions inspire quiet heroism. The archives invite scholars to explore the tension between pragmatism and principle, a dynamic relevant to modern ethical dilemmas. By preserving these truths, the Vatican ensures history's questions endure. Conclusion: silence's lasting echoes. The Vatican's secret archives, with their Archivio Pio Dei files, are a profound chronicle of the Catholic Church's role during World War II and the Holocaust. From unanswered Jewish pleas to diplomatic exchanges with Nazis, from secret efforts to hide Jews to undelivered speeches, these records capture a Church under siege, balancing survival with moral duty. Preserved with reverence, they reveal Pius XII's cautious strategy, his silence a protective shield that left a lasting echo of regret. The archive's motto, Veritas Temporis est, truth, belongs to time, encapsulates their mission to hold these stories until humanity is ready to learn from the Church's quiet struggles, its courage, and its unresolved questions. The philosophy of preservation. Veritas temporis est, truth awaits its time. The inscription, Veritas temporis est, in a secluded chamber of the Vatican Archives, encapsulates the Church's approach to preservation. Unlike secular archives that prioritize immediate access, the Vatican views its records as a sacred trust to be revealed when humanity is prepared to interpret them without distortion. This philosophy stems from a belief that truth, particularly when tied to faith, is not always immediately digestible. Historical records, whether confessions of doubt, controversial decisions, or suppressed visions, carry the weight of context and premature disclosure, risks oversimplification or misunderstanding. The archive's curators, often clerics trained in theology and history, argue that preservation protects truths from being reduced to sensational headlines or ideological weapons. For example, documents related to the Church's role during political upheavals, such as the World Wars, contain sensitive details that could be misconstrued without historical nuance. By safeguarding these records, the Vatican ensures they are studied in an era capable of grappling with their complexity, fostering understanding rather than judgment. A chapel, not a fortress. The Vatican Archives are often mischaracterized as a fortress of secrets, but their structure and purpose align more closely with a chapel, a space for reflection and revelation. The archives are organized into fondi, or collections, each meticulously cataloged to preserve the Church's spiritual and administrative history. These include papal bulls, diplomatic correspondences, and records of supernatural investigations, all housed in climate-controlled vaults to ensure their longevity. Yet the archives are not sealed off entirely. Scholars with specific credentials can access many documents, albeit under strict supervision. This selective openness reflects the Church's dual role as a guardian of faith and a participant in human history. The archives invite engagement with the unvarnished reality of faith, its doubts, failures, and moments of redemption, while protecting these truths from exploitation. The chamber bearing Veritas Temporis Est serves as a symbolic reminder that the archives are a place of contemplation, where the faithful and the curious alike can confront the Church's complex legacy. The contents of the archives: unanswered pleas and unsent letters. Among the archive's most poignant holdings are unanswered pleas and unsent letters, which reveal the human side of the Church's history. These documents include petitions from laypeople seeking papal intervention, requests for annulments, pleas for justice, or cries for spiritual guidance that were never answered due to bureaucratic constraints or political sensitivities. For instance, a 17th-century letter from a peasant woman begging for her son's release from unjust imprisonment remains unanswered, preserved as a testament to the Church's limitations in addressing every human need. Unsent letters, often drafted by popes or cardinals, offer equally compelling insights. A notable example is Pope Benedict XIV's 1741 draft, calling for the rehabilitation of Galileo, never published due to internal resistance. These documents, preserved in the archives, reflect moments of hesitation, doubt, or unfulfilled intent, humanizing the Church's leadership. By keeping these records, the Vatican acknowledges its imperfections, allowing future generations to learn from its silences as much as its actions. Quiet acts of redemption. The archives also document acts of redemption that went unnoticed in their time. Records of priests who risked their lives to protect marginalized communities, such as during persecutions or wars, are preserved alongside more controversial accounts. For example, the archives contain letters detailing quiet efforts by Vatican officials to shelter refugees during the 20th century, often without public acknowledgement. These acts, though not always successful, reflect the Church's commitment to charity and justice, even in the face of institutional constraints. By preserving these stories, the archives serve as a repository of hope, demonstrating that redemption often occurs in small, uncelebrated moments. The decision to retain such records rather than destroy them underscores the Church's belief in the enduring value of truth, even when it reveals failure or incomplete efforts. Suppressed visions and hidden masterpieces. The archives house records of suppressed visions and hidden artworks, such as those in the Deposito Pittorico Reservato and the Supernaturalis Recensio. Michelangelo's sketch of a figure in darkness, deemed too human, and African and Asian Virgin Mary sculptures excluded for their cultural divergence, are preserved despite their exclusion from public view. Similarly, the prophecy of Saint Malachi, with its cryptic mottos, is kept as a monitored myth, neither endorsed nor denounced. These records reflect the Church's caution in managing phenomena that challenge doctrinal or cultural norms, preserving them for a time when their significance might be better understood. The process of preservation, meticulous care, and selective access. The Vatican Archives employ rigorous preservation techniques to ensure the longevity of their holdings. Documents are stored in acid-free containers protected from light and humidity, and digitized to reduce physical handling. The process is overseen by a dedicated team of archivists, many of whom are priests with advanced degrees in history or library science. Their work is guided by a principle of stewardship. The archives are not merely historical records, but a sacred legacy entrusted to the Church for future generations. Access to the archives is tightly controlled, with researchers required to submit detailed proposals and credentials. Certain collections, particularly those involving recent popes or sensitive diplomatic matters, remain restricted for decades, typically 70 years after a pontificate's end. This selective access reflects the veritas temporis est philosophy, ensuring that truths are revealed when their impact can be contextualized. For example, the gradual opening of Pius the Burdal's wartime archives in 2020 allowed scholars to study the Church's role during the Holocaust, fostering nuanced discussions rather than polarized judgments. Avoiding oversimplification. The Church's cautious approach to disclosure stems from a desire to avoid oversimplification. Historical records, particularly those involving moral or theological complexity, can be misread without context. A 16th century plea for reform, for instance, might be interpreted as dissent, unless paired with evidence of the Church's broader efforts to address corruption. By delaying access to certain documents, the Vatican ensures that scholars and the public approach them with the historical distance needed for balanced interpretation. This strategy has drawn criticism from those who view the archives as secretive. But defenders argue it protects truths from being weaponized. The gradual release of documents, such as those related to the Galileo affair or the prophecy of Saint Malachi, demonstrates the Church's commitment to transparency, tempered by a belief that understanding requires readiness. The archives as a chapel of reflection, engaging with faith's unvarnished reality. The metaphor of the archives as a chapel underscores their role as a space for grappling with faith's complexities. Documents reveal the Church's doubts, such as clerics questioning Scripture's silence on scientific matters during the Galileo affair, and its failures, such as unanswered pleas from the marginalized. Yet they also highlight moments of grace, like quiet acts of redemption or the preservation of controversial artworks for future appreciation. Together, these records invite engagement with the Church's full spectrum of human experience. This engagement is not limited to scholars. The Vatican has increasingly made digitized records available online, allowing a broader audience to explore its history. Exhibitions such as those showcasing medieval manuscripts or papal correspondences further democratize access, inviting the faithful and the curious to confront the Church's legacy, warts and all. A space for forgiveness and understanding. The archive's gradual opening aligns with the Church's belief in humanity's readiness to forgive and understand. By preserving records of both triumphs and errors, the Vatican creates a space for reconciliation. For example, the release of documents related to the Church's response to historical injustices, such as its role in colonial missions, allows for honest reflection and dialogue. This process mirrors the sacramental act of confession, where acknowledging faults paves the way for healing. The Veritas Temporis Est chamber symbolizes this hope for reconciliation. Its inscription reminds archivists and visitors that truth is not static, but unfolds over time, shaped by humanity's capacity for empathy and growth. By preserving complex truths, the archives ensure that future generations can learn from the past without being bound by its divisions. The legacy of the Vatican Archives. A testament to patience. The Vatican Archives stand as a testament to the Church's patience in preserving truth. Unlike secular institutions that prioritize immediate transparency, the Vatican's approach reflects a theological perspective. Truth, like faith, requires time to mature. The Archives' preservation of unanswered pleas, unsent letters, and suppressed visions demonstrates a commitment to honesty, even when it reveals the Church's limitations. This patience has allowed the Archives to survive wars, revolutions, and cultural shifts, ensuring their relevance for centuries. The Archives' legacy lies in their ability to bridge past and future. By safeguarding documents that challenge simplistic narratives, they encourage a deeper understanding of the Church's role in history. The gradual release of records, such as those related to 20th-century popes, fosters scholarly dialogue and public reflection, reinforcing the Archives' role as a living resource. A call for engagement. The Vatican Archives invite us to engage with history as a dynamic process, not a fixed verdict. Their contents, spanning pleas, prophecies, and acts of redemption, challenge us to confront the complexities of faith and human endeavor. The Veritas Temporis Est philosophy encourages patience, reminding us that understanding requires time and humility. As the Archives open further, they offer an opportunity to explore the Church's unvarnished reality, fostering a dialogue that transcends judgment and embraces truth's transformative power. Conclusion. Truth's timeless sanctuary. The Vatican Archives are more than a collection of documents. They are a sanctuary where truth awaits its moment. Guided by the principle of Veritas Temporis Est, the Church preserves unanswered pleas, unsent letters, and quiet acts of redemption, trusting that humanity will one day be ready to receive them. Far from a fortress of secrecy, the Archives are a chapel of reflection, inviting us to grapple with faith's doubts, failures, and triumphs. As they open, gradually aligning with our capacity for forgiveness and understanding, the Archives remind us that truth, like grace, unfolds in time, revealing not just the Church's past, but humanity's shared journey toward wisdom and reconciliation.